Thank you, everyone, and good evening. We did not meet in closed session. I normally ask if there's a report, which in this case there is not. So we'll go right to open time for public expression, which is an opportunity for you to address us on matters of interest. Because it's not on the agenda, we can't take action on that is on your mind, but certainly interested in your input. And we'll start with Somalia Lux, Salama. You know, I haven't pronounced that right yet, and you come before us about a dozen times. I apologize.
It's only been
Salama.
6 years.
If I could phonetically, Salama.
Salama
Anyway,
does not eat salami.
I'll add no I at the end. Good
Accent
evening.
on the second syllable. Okay.
Fair enough.
Good evening, Mayor Phillips and commissioners. Council members. Salama Laux, Commissioner for San Rafael. And I wanted to let you know about our meeting this Thursday. It will be at the Margaret Todd Community Center in Novato. Can you hear me? From this Thursday, June 6th, from 10 to 11. And the topic is Mosaic of Family Caregiving. So all the different ins and outs of caring for a dependent family member. Learn 6 aspects of family caregiving and the resources and more. And the speakers will be Kathleen Sue Quintus. She is a doctorally prepared nurse, and Fred Silverman, who's a retired social worker, and they're going to be giving the presentation. So that's, again, at the Margaret Todd Senior Center, 10 to 11, and then our board meeting is after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Salama. Thank you. Before we proceed, I want to read a restatement, and it starts before we begin. We would like to announce that tonight's City Council meeting will be included in Spanish, a language interpretation provided by qualified interpreters, Oscar and Sylvia. The interpreters will provide simultaneous interpreting starting at the beginning of this evening's meeting and running through completion of item 5A. And thanks for being with us. With that, further, yes, good evening.
I couldn't fill out the card, Mayor Phillips.
That's okay. You don't, it's not required. The mic and introduction would be most appropriate, though.
I'm here because of 2 meetings ago, Mr. Gamblin brought up thermoplastic.
Say again?
For green thermoplastic for a
Yes.
bike path. I absolutely agree with that. It's far more cost effective. But in the process, I heard multiple discussions from at least a couple different people about dual bike paths. One for the average bicyclist and one for the fast bicyclist. And being in conjunction with one another. I found that very disturbing. I mean, I don't think the city has enough money to support the Public Works Department and the Police Department in the manner in which they should be. I think they're both underfunded in many aspects, and the Police Department definitely undermanned, and also Public Works. So to hear the thought, of something right out of the Bike Coalition's wish list, a second bike path, I have a problem with that when you can't take care of what you already have. And that's all I've got to say about that.
And thanks for your comments.
You're welcome.
Alka-Pops were banned some number of years ago, actually. Any other comments, input? In which case, we'll close public, come back to, excuse me, the consent calendar.
Mr. Mayor, do
Items.
you want a city manager report before?
Oh, I do,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
Butchering this thing. Been down in Scottsdale playing golf, you can tell. In any case, let's go back to the city manager report.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I just wanted to bring up, I'm going to try to remind myself to talk more slowly when there's translation
Thank
going
you.
on, but I have a hard time doing that. We had a significant road closure on 2nd Street this past weekend due to the SMART train construction project as SMART makes its way to Larkspur. And I just wanted to report out, because I spoke with both the police chief and the public works director, that there were certainly delays, and I'm sure that there were frustrated motorists that were inconvenienced, but we did not have any major problems. And I know that several of us checked in on it through the weekend And I did on Saturday. I know the mayor did on Sunday and others. And it was, I think, flowing as good as possible with the fact that it was closed between Heatherton and Tamalpais. I bring it up not to say that it seemed to go better than we thought it would, but really to note that it's happening again this coming weekend on the next street on 3rd, because they were trying to take them one at a time to inconvenience motorists as little as possible. So it's the same schedule that will start on a Friday afternoon, this coming Friday for 3rd Street. And it's intended to go through very early on Monday morning, but SMART, to their credit, finished early on the 2nd Street project, and they were done by 5:20 on Sunday p.m. So that's great. So I appreciate the fact that the construction crew was working as quickly as they could, and we also appreciate all the notification that they did to make sure that it wasn't a bigger problem than it was. And hopefully people will still try to avoid the area this coming weekend. Also wanted to note that before we have another city council meeting, our downtown farmers market will be beginning, something that you approved on your last city council meeting. It starts Thursday evenings starting on June 13th. So June 13th is the first one from 6 to 9 p.m. and they run through September. So that's coming up. And then lastly, a couple notes on our consent calendar tonight. We have an item on the consent calendar which is C, or 4C, which is the flavored tobacco ban. And I just wanted to explain for anyone that was here in the audience for that item tonight that it's we're required on an ordinance to have a first reading and a public hearing. And then typically what happens is that the next meeting, the item is on the consent calendar for a second reading because the council has already heard from the community, you've spent a considerable amount of time on it, you've made your deliberations, and you've voted, and you've given direction to staff. So typically the second time on the agenda, it ends up being more of a formality because most of the discussion happens at the first meeting. We had all five members of the city council when we had the full discussion, and unfortunately we only have 4 tonight. So staff is going to be strongly recommending that you continue that item until our next meeting when we have all 5 council members here again. I think that would be most respectful to the process because I know all 5 council members wanted to be a part of the decision making. And then on there's an item on Albert Park Playground as just a completion, which is very routine for us to put these completions on the consent calendar. But I received an email from Samantha Sargent today, who lives, as you may know, immediately across the street. And I just wanted to share part of it with you because it was so positive about that project. And we're so happy that has been completed successfully. She says, first off, there are more kids over there than I thought we had in the whole city. The playground is filled with children playing from sunup to sundown. Some days it's so busy one would think there's a birthday party or something going on, but this is a normal afternoon in the space now. We've changed how the space is used through environmental design. So I thought that was very well said and sums up kind of the transformation that has taken place in that playground. And then lastly, also on the consent calendar, I believe Vice Mayor McCullough, and I'll let you speak to that, Mr. Vice Mayor, when this comes up, wants to pull item H to make a few clarification comments about what the council's actually being asked to approve.
Right.
Thank you.
And thanks for the summary. I too ventured, I'll just comment quickly, I ventured to the downtown on Sunday. I was out of town through Saturday, and I thought more than once about, well, maybe I'll just extend this for a couple more days until things settle down, but I did fly back Saturday late afternoon and ventured down Sunday, and it was perhaps like your experience, maybe better than I expected, long lines, but no horns honking. I sent Farhad Mansourian, the general manager of SMART, a note this morning that saying that at least I hadn't been run out of town yet, and good luck with the next phase, which is this coming weekend. So I hope it'll go reasonably well also. Although he claims that they were out by 4, so I don't know. Even better. And I did have a comment. with regard to Albert Park as well. It's a consent calendar, so we normally don't comment on these items, but those of you and others can certainly be applauded for the work that you did to bring that to our city. Back on the closure, I also want to thank City of Novato. As I passed through our city, San Rafael, Sunday, there were 4 police cars from Novato that were assisting, thanks to the chief, in making those arrangements. So certainly want to appreciate Novato and their support when we needed a few more bodies in San Rafael. So thank you very much for that. With that, I know that there are 2 items that were mentioned with closing that. Moving on now to the consent item, sorry. 2 items to address outside of consent, and they are C, flavored tobacco, so I would appreciate a motion with regard to that item, and then we'll turn to H, in which time you can offer a motion if you're so inclined. So, first, 4C, flavored tobacco products, for the reason mentioned, second reading. I think a motion to table this item would be appropriate.
Well, may I make a joint motion if I could?
You want both?
Well, no, I think
either one would be terribly controversial.
I think what I'm going to do.
But we're gonna do 2 different things, so a separate
Sure.
motion would be appropriate.
Okay. What I thought I was going to do, but tell me if I'm
Yeah.
Going in the wrong direction here, is that I move that we pass or that we approve the consent calendar, but we pull item H for public discussion, and that we postpone item C for a future council meeting, at which time all council members are expected to be present. Can we do it that way?
That's one way to do it. We normally don't, but that's one way. But I would suggest with regard to the second item, that is the flavored tobacco that's going to be returned, that be specific as to our next meeting, which is June 17th.
Then I would conform my motion to make it June 17th.
Everybody understand the motion? If there is a second, we'll move on.
Second.
Anyone from the public wish to address us on the items that will be acted upon? Close. Moved and second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Collin.
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Aye.
Vice Mayor McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, the matter carries 4-0. And we'll move to item H, since flavored tobacco has been tabled for the next meeting. Move to item H. Loch Lomond 10.
If I may, I'd like to make a few comments, and to the extent staff wishes to respond, Bill Guerin in this case, he certainly can, but I also wanted to give an opportunity to members of the public who are here possibly on this item to comment to do so. Perhaps after my comments they won't feel the need, but I suspect they would like to anyway, and I want to give them a full and fair opportunity to do so. So just by way of background, while the staff report lays out the history of the Loch Lomond 10 assessment district in a fair bit of detail, what is important to note is that there has been some concern expressed in the community of homeowners that constitutes Loch Lomond 10 about, one, the historical maintenance and work done with the funds that are subject to the assessment over the last number of years, and an accounting as to those funds, and 2, the accuracy of the engineer's report that was initially prepared in anticipation of this assessment, and then the scaled down version that was in fact attached to the staff report. After some back and forth, it seems to me the most prudent course of action is to do what all parties agree should be done, which is to pass the proposed assessment, but to not do so by incorporating or by doing so in reference to the engineer's report. And I have some proposed edits to the resolution, and I think in fact those edits may have been made by our city attorney's office, and I'm prepared to introduce that in lieu of the resolution that was attached to the staff report.
And why don't you read that in case there are members of the audience who wish to address us on this item? There'll be a most updated version.
Sure. Well, rather than read the whole resolution, let me explain what it is that I'm proposing to change, and that would then give those in the audience with an interest the opportunity to respond. I'm proposing that there are 2 recitals in the resolution. Pardon me, there's 1 recital, and then the resolution itself that should be revised. Recital number recital number 6, the recital that begins, whereas at the request of the Director of Public Works, that recital would be deleted in its entirety. And then at the end of the resolving paragraph, the last line, 2 lines would be deleted, starting as provided in the engineer's annual report through to the end of incorporated herein by reference. That would eliminate the reference to the annual report. And then 1 additional paragraph, an additional recital would be inserted for clarity. And I'll read that recital that would be inserted for clarity as the last recital in the resolution. It would read, whereas the maximum special tax the city may assess on the taxable parcels in CFD 1992-1 under resolution number 8839 is $793 per parcel for fiscal year 2019-20, open parens, $171 towards the sinking fund and $622 towards the maintenance fund, close parens. And city staff has determined that even if the maximum tax is imposed for fiscal year 2019-20, the revenue from the special tax will not exceed the city's annual costs incurred in maintaining CFD 1992-1. That is the revised resolution that I would propose we adopt this evening. And that the rest of the staff report we simply receive but not take action on.
And thanks, Councilmember McCullough has done a considerable amount of work with the community directly on this issue, and so thanks for bringing that to us, and particularly the clarity, and understand some to be decided at this point, but certainly some degree of concurrence.
May I add one more comment?
Sure,
I'm sorry.
of course.
I think it's also important that in lieu of approving or commenting on the engineer's report, instead we provide informal direction to staff, which in fact they've already received and I think intend to do anyway, but informal direction to staff to continue their meetings with the Homeowners Association in order to come up with a mutually acceptable engineer's report and maintenance manual that would follow in the wake of this approved assessment.
And thanks for that. Anything to add? I'm sure you do.
No, but I definitely appreciate Councilmember McCullough's involvement in getting us to this resolution tonight. We've been working with the Homeowners Association for over a year now, from last year when we decided not to assess a tax to now, trying to work through the issues with the Loch Lomond 10 and the engineer's report that we produced. We're making good progress on that, but there is some work to do still, so I appreciate the fact that we've found a way to get the tax assessment put in place and continue to resolve the engineer's report.
So you're in concurrence with the suggested changes?
Yes, yes, Mayor.
Yeah. And you too made reference to Councilmember McCullough, and I didn't mean to slight him in any way by not making reference to Vice Mayor McCullough. Since we both did, I feel a little bit better.
I'm very slighted.
Any other comments before we ask for public comment? Public comment with regard to this item. Anyone? I'll take that as further concurrence.
Well then, without restating the entirety of what I said earlier,
Please, please.
I
Ferris.
move that we approve item H, subject to the additional direction and revisions I outlined earlier.
And thanks for doing so. Is there
And a
second?
heartfelt second for doing that.
Moved and second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Collin.
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Aye.
Vice Mayor McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, matter carries 4-0. Thanks, everybody, for helping us with this issue in particular. Andrew. We'll now move on to public hearing item 5A, rental housing ordinances. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. I'm Andrew Henning, the Director of Homeless Planning and Outreach with the city. Tonight, we're here for first readings of 2 potential rental housing regulations in San Rafael. As a quick reminder, for fiscal year 2018-19, the council's goals and objectives included exploring potential protections to increase rental and ownership housing affordability in San Rafael. On August 20th of last year, our Community Development Director, Paul Jensen, presented a housing overview report. At that time, the council provided direction to staff to come back on and bring back potential rental regulation policies to achieve these goals. On February 4th of this year, staff introduced
We're interpreting, so slow down
Oh.
just a little bit.
Sure. Staff introduced two policies that are commonly referred to as just cause for eviction and mandatory mediation. At that time, the City Council formed an ad hoc renter housing subcommittee. And on May 6th, so about a month ago, staff returned with recommendations from that subcommittee to the full City Council. As a quick reminder, the rental housing dispute ordinance, if passed, would basically create a program where if a triggering event occurs, such as a rent increase above a certain percentage, then a renter could request a mediation service with their landlord. Both parties would be required to participate, but the outcome would not be binding. For a cause required for eviction ordinance, it would basically do just that. It would identify acceptable reasons that a landlord could evict a tenant. Overall, the subcommittee recommends that the City Council adopt both of these policies, and that was the recommendation at the May 6th meeting. However, at that meeting, we also had some lingering policy questions that we wanted to get feedback from the full City Council on. Those questions included which units are covered by these policies, what triggers the mediation service, what type of eviction data can and should we collect, and how do we pay for these programs. Based on feedback from the full City Council as well as the public, the Rental Housing Committee met one more time. That committee included the mayor, Councilmember McCullough, or Vice Mayor McCullough. Supervisor Dennis Rodoni had been attending but did not attend our final meeting. Omar Carrera from Canal Alliance attended in his place. David Levin with Legal Aid, and Scott Gerber, a local property owner and real estate agent. Taking the feedback from the council, tonight's two ordinances for first reading consideration include the following final recommendations. The rental housing dispute ordinance would apply to all rental units in San Rafael. The cause for eviction ordinance would apply to properties with 3 or more units. And for both policies, government or deed-restricted affordable units would be exempted. Mediations would be triggered by a rent increase of 5% or greater over a 12-month period. This was changed from 10%, which was the recommendation last time. And I should note for the applicability, this applicability of all units for the rental housing dispute ordinance and the properties with 3 or more units for the cause for eviction matches what the county of Marin adopted. Point 3, the city will not maintain a landlord registry, which is something that the county had created. We already basically cover this through our business license process, and we will not be receiving copies of eviction notices. Finally, we're recommending that we're funding this program, which is basically the major cost is through the mediation program, for $40,000 for the first year, and that money is coming from the Homeless Initiative's budget. So we've covered these policies at length, so I wanted to keep it short, and with that, I'll turn it back to the council.
And thanks for your report. Any questions? John?
Yeah, I have a question. Can you update us on the status of AB 1482?
Yes. So just this past week, the state of California, the Assembly specifically, passed a statewide rent cap proposal. It still needs to clear the Senate, so it's not officially law yet. But essentially what this bill would do is apply a rent cap to essentially all properties, rental properties in California that are not currently covered by rent control. There is an exemption that came out just last week for properties that have been on the market for less than 10 years. But the rent cap would be 7% plus the cost of living. So that would be determined annually. And just of note, this was published in the IJ, but a recent statewide poll found that about 2/3 of California voters and about 70% of Bay Area voters supported a rent cap at 5% plus CPI. So essentially, if we were to continue to move forward and have the mandatory mediation policy, then if a rent increase was from 5% to the proposed cap, then a tenant could still request a service, and then the state law would supersede our policy for rent caps, or rent increases above that.
And as originally submitted or proposed, AB 1482 also had a 5% number in there, but it was changed to 7%. What was behind that?
based on the reporting that I've seen, it was discussions that lawmakers had with different industry groups. And so I think they were advocating for a higher threshold as well as the 10-year exemption for new buildings. So I think it was just something that they had ironed out.
And isn't there a sunset date on this as well?
I'm not sure, honestly. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think I read it as 2023 that sunsets as well. So when you say that they my understanding was that all these bills needed to be submitted by last Thursday, or they were shelved till the next year, and the companion bill to this that referenced Just Cause did not pass or did not get put up for vote, so that's not on tap for this as well. What are we finding? You know, we see the recent statewide poll, but if the industry associations, I would imagine that would be the apartment owners or landlords or whatever, and I think what I read was that they removed their objection to it by raising that cap to 7+ the annual increase in cost of living, which I understand is about 2.5%, so that gets it to around, on average, which is around 9.5%. What do you know anything about the logic behind that? Was it just they couldn't get it passed without that?
That's a good question. I honestly don't know. I will say that there was a question at the last council meeting about the 5%, the logic of the 5%. Was it just we're doing what everyone else is doing, or is there some logic to it? I will say that the Bay Area CPI is closer to 4.8%, so the 5% does make sense, and I think we heard from the public that there was concern about going higher. But I'm not sure about what finally tipped it for the lawmakers that agreed to this 7% increase.
Yeah, you know, one of it'd be nice to know as well if the directly surrounding areas outside of Marin, you know, specifically Petaluma, Sonoma, Vallejo, what have they done? I didn't really see any of that in the staff report. The reason I bring that up is that my fear is that by doing this, and I've stated numerous times that I don't believe that we actually have a rent problem. I believe we have a lack of housing problem, and that with more units that the rents will, you know, with just the law of supply and demand, kind of bring themselves into equilibrium with what the market has, and not be so out of whack that developers that would be interested in building in Marin, if surrounding areas such as Petaluma and Sonoma or Vallejo don't have this, and they're going to be under AB 1482 should it pass the Senate, you know, what incentive will they have to build more units in San Rafael, which will, or Marin County for that matter? So while folks are saying if we did something different than the other cities around us, that we'd be creating this a disjointed ordinance that wouldn't be in line with the rest of the counties. I fear that that's going to be the same thing with the other counties or the other cities that are not putting forth these plans, and make it less attractive for the city to attract development here. What's your point? We need so you don't. The question is there anything? I didn't see anything in the staff report regarding the surrounding communities outside of Marin, specifically Petaluma and Sonoma.
I hadn't looked at the specific communities you had mentioned, but in the staff report for the Bay 6 meeting, we looked at about, I think, 20 total communities that were a number of East Bay communities and some others. But
right, no,
not
I know
those
that
specific
just
ones.
in terms of just location in proximity to us. So
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Two comments with regard to your ballot points. The subcommittee did consider this factor, as you know. In fact, our first recommendation was higher, which was at 10%, which 7+ some CPI number is close to that number. The rationale, at least expressed by, I'll say, the apartment owner's representative, was that the 5% would build into an annual increase of 5% or very close to it, just because that would be provided for and they wouldn't have to go back to mediation. So felt that it would ratchet up at that rate regardless of their return on investment, et cetera. So they may have run into the same issue. I suspect they did, and that was probably a compromise. I'm speculating now, but it was probably a compromise. There's no magic in either of those numbers, but we finally settled as a recommendation to this council at 5% to be consistent with the county and certainly many surrounding communities. First thing. Second thing, I would suggest that you're right with regard to the overall economic equilibrium of rents and demand and supply. However, on a shorter term, such as we're in now, perhaps, where there's adjustment periods, this is a means of perhaps getting to a more equitable position. Keep in mind that there's nothing in here that is saying that rents shall be. This is not rent control, but rather an opportunity for two parties that are affected by an increase to come to the same table to discuss the matter, and perhaps the agreement will be 15%. I mean, who knows? Those will be individual discussions, but there's nothing in here that dictates rent control. I don't think we would necessarily be in favor of rent control. So I wouldn't extrapolate from this to rent control, but rather a means of affording an opportunity for individuals so affected to meet and confer. Having said that, any other comments before public? Public comment on this item.
I'm Gordon Schaefer, a property owner in the Canal District, and I have rental property. And I want to say that I believe the considerations for these ordinances is just and very useful, and I think that 5% increase is certainly fine for both renter and rentee, and would encourage the council to move in that direction to align us with supervisors of the county as well. Thank you.
And thanks for your comments. Evening.
I'm Pastor Tom Gable of Marin Lutheran Church, part of the Marin Organizing Committee. I live and own a home in Terra Linda. All those here with MOC, please stand. In Scripture, we hear how Jesus was asked, "Who are our neighbors?" And he tells the Good Samaritan story. A man is robbed, beaten, and left for dead. Two people pass by and don't help. A third stops and assists the battered man to get back on his feet. Who is the neighbor? The person who helped the beaten and battered man. Some of our neighbors who rent are being battered and beaten by unconscionable rent increases. As we've heard from our neighbors, these increases can lead to a whole host of unhealthy outcomes, from parents foregoing medicines to pay for rent, to families tolerating dangerous apartment conditions in fear of eviction. Allowing this situation to continue, passing by on the other side, is not an option. Thankfully, you, the San Rafael City Council members and staff, have been working in good faith to remedy these unjust conditions. Last December, you passed a source of income law, and tonight, we urge you to continue doing the right thing for our neighbors who rent. We urge you to pass the first reading of mandatory mediation and just cause. We also understand that passing these ordinances is only the first step. San Rafael will need to conduct a comprehensive and well-resourced multilingual public education and outreach campaign. If these ordinances are going to be truly effective, MOC looks forward to partnering with city staff, including code enforcement and inspection, to continue creating a more just and livable San Rafael for all of our neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you.
City Council members, my name is Michael Burke. I am a real estate agent with Golden Gate Sotheby's, and I have been selling apartment buildings in Marin since 1973. I've worked with the city, and you've sought my counsel many times in the past as you've dealt with issues with apartment building owners. I have no problem with the mandatory mediation. I do, however, have question a couple aspects of the ordinance. First, the cost of the mediation to tenants and the owners concerns me. Unlike the County of Marin and Fairfax, the City of San Rafael is only picking up the cost of the mediation for the first year and apportioning it to the participants thereafter. Mediation is not cheap, and I believe the cost would deter tenants from seeking it out. I believe also the cost would be equally unfair to owners who are faced to have to respond with a mediation request from another party. If you move forward on mandatory mediation ordinance, I think it's very important that you pick up the cost for the mediation beyond the first year. Secondly, I would ask that you go back to the original 10% flag instead of the new 5%. This will catch the greatest offenders, and it will limit the mediations maybe to a more manageable number. I also take serious concern with the just cause for eviction ordinance. The ordinance appears to address an issue that's not really, in my mind, a problem in San Rafael, where owners already do not evict tenants without a good cause. Owners in San Rafael want to keep good tenants. Aside from the obvious evictions for failure to pay rent or a material breach of the rental agreements, the few other evictions are typically reserved for problem tenants who are a serious nuisance to other tenants. These tenants include individuals engaging in illegal activities such as dealing drugs or prostitution, and they are usually identified by complaints from other tenants. Problem tenants need to be evicted quickly. If they aren't, the building owner finds all the other good tenants are leaving in mass numbers. I'm sorry, just a quick second if I can.
Until you wrap up.
While
sure.
the ordinance tries to address these issues, I do not believe it does so effectively. It places an impossible burden on the owners to prove that the tenant is doing illegal activities or presenting a true nuisance to the other tenants. In the time it would take an owner to prove the activities or answer a challenge from an experienced tenant, the other good tenants in the building would be affected and be making plans to leave. It's not fair for the good tenants nor the owner. Can I push for another minute?
No, thank you.
Pardon?
No,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
Next, please.
Good evening, council members. My name is Gabriela Ventura, and I'm here representing Marin Community Clinics, which is a member of MOC. And my job is to help patients enroll and maintain health insurance. I've lived in Marin County my whole life and have seen how the housing crisis in our county has forced families to make tough decisions, mostly financial ones, not based on what the family needs, but what they can afford. I remember one day going home feeling empty and heartbroken, after I watched a mother cry in my office because her children no longer qualified for Medi-Cal, and their only option was a $532 a month insurance premium, the cheapest plan on covered California. Her daughter was diabetic and needed insulin. And after co-pays and doing the math, her family would end up paying $800 a month on their children's health care. I asked if her husband could not work for a few days, maybe that would make them qualify for Medi-Cal, and she said, no, if we do that, we'd be homeless. I tried convincing her that, yeah, $800 is a lot, but her daughter needed it to survive, but nothing I said worked. And she left my office with no insurance. I haven't seen her since that day. And every now and then I check the girls' chart to see if they've come back, if their Medi-Cal is active again. But there's been nothing. No updates, no appointments scheduled. Just gone into the abyss. This is just one story of a recurring trend that I keep seeing every day, and honestly, I don't know how much longer I can watch this. This law has the power to save lives, and I really hope you guys would enact it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Good evening. I'm Carolyn Peedy with Fair Housing Advocates of Northern California. We wholeheartedly support both a mandatory mediation ordinance and a just cause for eviction ordinance in the city of San Rafael as part of an integrated approach that supports other policies already in place, such as the source of income ordinance. We believe that a joint ordinance is a crucial step to preserving affordable housing for the most vulnerable populations in San Rafael who are protected under federal and state fair housing law, who we serve every day. When there's a lack of rental protections for tenants, it's members of protected classes particularly people of color, families with children, and people with disabilities who are targeted and suffer disproportionately. We're pleased that 5% is written as the trigger for mandatory mediation to kick in, and believe that the city is heading in the right direction in aligning the threshold with other jurisdictions. Having said this, it's worth mentioning that departures from the language of the county's ordinances, particularly with mandatory mediation, may create unnecessary confusion among landlords with properties in multiple jurisdictions. On just cause, we're losing the opportunity to collect valuable data points by excising the requirement for landlords to furnish the notice of termination to the city. It seems to be a crucial piece of being able to adequately evaluate the ordinance and its effect. And finally, we urge that all rental units be covered by this ordinance, just as with mandatory mediation. In its current form, by the staff's own reckoning, 32% of tenants will be excluded from these protections, which seems very unfair to that 32%. And that doesn't even include, of course, Section 8 tenants who don't have this protection. These comments notwithstanding, I commend the City Council for moving forward on these badly needed protections for our tenants who are increasingly vulnerable, and urge you to adopt both ordinances without delay. Thank you very much.
And thank you.
Good evening. My name is Sammy Miracle with the Marin Environmental Housing Collaborative, a member of the Marin Organizing Committee. I'm also a renter in San Rafael, and I'm going to be focusing my comments on just cause. We thank you for listening to the concerns of San Rafael's renters. As you are well aware, we are in the middle of a housing crisis that is having devastating impacts on our communities. Over the past year, this council has heard stories from dozens of families suddenly facing homelessness and displacement because their rent goes up, or watching their children suffer health issues because they're afraid they'll be evicted if they complain about bad conditions. San Rafael's economy depends on renters. They work in our hotels, restaurants, assisted living developments, and other businesses. As the city makes way for more of these businesses, we must make sure that there are places for these moderate and low-wage workers to live. We agree with many, including Councilmember Gamblin, who have noted throughout this process that San Rafael needs to build more affordable housing. But building more housing is only one part of the solution. We also need to protect those who already live here. And there's no research to support the argument that a just cause for eviction ordinance would damper San Rafael's already minimal housing production. Recent studies suggest that even more powerful tenant protections, such as rent stabilization, do not damper new construction. Mandatory mediation and just cause must go together to ensure that tenants feel safe exercising their rights. Just cause has been recommended by many groups, including the CASA Compact and the Counties of Marin's Advisory Group on Fair Housing. It is particularly important in protecting sensitive groups from discrimination, such as renters of color, LGBT renters, and renters with disabilities. As part of the Just Cause for Eviction ordinance, we support a data collection requirement, such as requiring landlords to send the city a copy of notices of termination. This will provide data to the city as to who is being asked to leave their homes and why, and can inform future city actions on tenant and landlord relations. We would also like to see Just Cause for Eviction applied to all rental units in San Rafael. Thank you.
And thank you.
Good evening. Dave Corey, Marin Housing Solutions. It's an honor to be before you tonight. I will take exception with one point, Councilmember Gamble. I think my immediate predecessor mentioned that you were in favor of more affordable housing, and I think more generally you're in favor of more housing. And there are a number of research papers that show that housing is in segments. Anyone can come in. I own a mid-market triplex, brand new sidewalk, hole in the ground ready for a tree, and a repaired sewer. So thanks very much for the job, Van Mitty and the San Rafael. I could easily upgrade that and make it a high market rent. I'm in Gerso Park, prime area, but I choose not to. There are a dozen people I talk with on a weekly basis who are either homeless or on the verge of homeless. If you want to deal with the rent crisis and the housing crisis, you need to amend your zoning and development codes to welcome affordable housing. It's not enough to have units. Back when I did the study, the median income in Marin was 110,000. Now it's around 132,000. The median wage, 48,000. So building housing for the middle won't cut it. You're causing pain. I support what Carolyn Petey had to say.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council. My name is Asya Serkers, and I'm here from Legal Aid of Marin. I'm a staff attorney there, mainly focused on housing. I just wanted to give you a message from David Levin. I'm sorry he could not be here tonight. He sends his regards and wanted to thank you for all the work that you've done in bringing this ordinance closer to the Marin County Ordinance. Thank you. We wanted to also thank you on behalf of our clients. Every day we see people who are on the brink of homelessness. They could be homeless next week, next month, next year, but they are looking straight into homelessness. These very important ordinances would give people that assurance that they will not be evicted without a reason. We see no-cause evictions every day at Legal Aid. The other thing we would really urge you to do is to have the Just Cause ordinance apply to all renters in the city. There are people falling through the cracks, just as there would have been if you had not changed the mandatory mediation ordinance. And those people will be seeking help and will have nowhere to go. Thank you so much.
Please say hi to David for us.
I'm sorry.
I just said, please say hi to David for us. He was very helpful in getting us to this point.
I will, absolutely. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I could make an announcement briefly, if everyone who's speaking, if you could speak very slowly to make sure that our interpreter is able to interpret accurately, that would be great. Thank you.
And thanks for that, and we'll all try. It's difficult. Good evening.
Hi, my name is Martin Neville. I'm a landlord, and today I read through some of the drafts, and I have just some specific comments that I hope are helpful. Firstly, I'm in favor of the mediation and just cause. But when I read through the things today, and I spoke to Andrew for a half an hour just to kind of clarify so that we can obey what the rules are, there were some issues which came up. I'd assumed that there was going to be some guidance notes with the legislation, but what Andrew mentioned was that we'd actually have to follow the rules as they were laid out. So I do have some comments, and I hope they're helpful. The first issue on the just cause is I noticed that there was a reference to great bodily harm, and I just think, I don't think there's any place for any threats between landlords and tenants, and I think the great should be taken out, and I just, that's one aspect. The second aspect that I think is that one of the difficulties with being a landlord is that even though there are crazy landlords, there's also crazy tenants. And so what happens is, in relation to the nuisance, is a very, very big issue in relation to practical management of apartment buildings. Again, I thought on that seeing that the policy was that we were going to bring in certainty and we were going to promote fairness, I just thought in relation to the nuisance that the words so disorderly and of such a nuisance that I think it might be better just to be clear with people that disorderly and nuisance conduct is not tolerable either from a tenant or a landlord. I just thought that it would be better to more define that. And also in relation to nuisance and disorderly conduct, it's not clear that the terms of the lease and the house rules should be followed. I just felt that if landlords and tenants were going to follow the rules as set out without guidance notes, I just thought that it would make things much clearer there if that was a definition. I'm also very confused about tenant households because in 3 areas on page 5, 6, and 7, it says that the tenant household can remove the tenant from the building, that the tenant that all of a sudden that the tenant household who you would not have known are suddenly tenants of yours. I just felt that area could be tightened up considerably, because as a landlord you really need to know who your tenants are, and I just felt that was a very, very loose area that could dealt with. And also
could you wrap it up, please?
Okay, and on civil remedies, I just thought that that should be fair between tenant and landlord. I think that it should be each party should behave properly to each other, not just to be one-sided. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Well, good evening.
Good evening, Mayor Phillips and honorable council members. My name's Scott Gerber. I am an apartment guy. I'm an apartment veteran. I've been in the real estate business since 1989 and have a lot of experience in the multifamily housing business. And it was an honor to serve on the subcommittee with Mayor Phillips, Vice Mayor McCullough, David Levin, and a number of other, Andrew, Jim, Rob was there. However, I feel like I failed my constituents as the one sole member of the ownership community. My interest as a resident of this city and as a business person in this city is for the residents in the community of San Rafael. And I think that's clear to you, and I hope that it is, and that it always will be. However, I want to make my statement so that everyone's clear about where my position is. I oppose the proposed mandatory mediation and just cause for eviction ordinances in concept and as proposed and revised. What I do support in my role as an advocate for rental housing and as a resident of San Rafael is for a rental services office, or whatever name we want to use, that would provide a means to discuss and resolve tenant and owner rental housing disputes, whether it be rent increases, property condition, nuisance behavior, or other reasons. To me, that would provide a middle step between what we have now, which is nothing, and a full-blown ordinance that mandates how rental housing operators have to operate. I feel it's better to establish dialogue to gauge effectiveness and then create policy that reflects the needs of this community. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this process, and I wanted to be clear about how I stand on that.
And we appreciate it, and thanks once again for helping us get to this point. Thank you. Good evening. I'm sure that someone will help. Thanks, Lindsay.
Mayor Phillips, members of the City Council, for the record, my name is Peter Mendoza, and I'm the Director of Advocacy for the Marin Center for Independent Living. And first, on behalf of Marin Center for Independent Living, we want to thank you for adopting the Fair Housing Ordinance several months ago. We're in support of the comments made by the Marin Organizing Committee and Carolyn P.D. with Fair Housing Advocates, Legal Aid of Marin. People with disabilities are really affected by evictions and rising rents. And we just cause a mandatory mediation will provide a more equal playing field for people with disabilities and seniors and those who are low, moderate income to be able to stay in San Rafael and the community that they love. At MCIL, we're a service and advocacy agency for people with disabilities. But one of the primary issues that we hear about on a daily basis is people that are received eviction notices or are having issues because of rising rents. And it's very difficult when someone's rent is being raised beyond their ability to pay or because of an eviction for them to find housing in Marin or San Rafael, as you already know. One comment I wanted to mention, comments were made periodically at this meeting and others that things need to be done to get rid of problem tenants. Well, a number of the issues that were mentioned would be considered lease violations or violations of laws, and those wouldn't be affected by this ordinance. And I can tell you, as a person with a disability, Oftentimes in the past, we can be labeled as problem tenants just trying to exercise our rights under law. So we really need ordinances like this. We commend the city of San Rafael for all of your work to put these ordinances together, and we really want this to move forward. Thank you very much.
And thanks for your comments. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Alex Calfin with the California Apartment Association. Thank you for the opportunity to be here again. I'm mainly here this evening to restate our opposition to both of the ordinance. I believe you received a letter which outlined our position in more detail, and I won't get into the specifics and lack of time. But I did want to say that I think that there are generally some really significant issues with both of these bills. There's a very good reason why the rent cap bill barely made it out of assembly and why the just cause bill didn't. I think there are some significant challenges and some very significant unintended consequences. Unfortunately, I really hope that I would be here this evening to tell you that we were able to get together, sit down, work out an ordinance that works great for everyone, but we are just not there. From the apartment association perspective, there's very little in both of these ordinances that really show that anything was really given. It's mainly sort of what we typically oppose. The other thing I would say is that there's absolutely a housing crisis in the state of California, and in Marin County, no one here is going to argue that. I mean, that's very clear. But I think it's a problem when, at its core, not enough homes are being built. And I just want to be clear, I'm not talking about just market rate homes. I'm talking about all kinds of homes. There's a shortage of housing until we move the needle to increase the supply. The demand is going to be high. And no matter what you do, you can have these policies. They're just not really going to make a huge difference. We represent apartment owners, and we're familiar with this market. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you again.
And thanks for being here this evening.
Hi, I'm Marilyn Sweeney. I'm past board chair of North Bay Family Homes, which is, do I need to start at the beginning? Okay, I'm Marilyn Sweeney. I'm past board chair of North Bay Family Homes, which has provided thousands of affordable housing ownerships and affordable rental units in the county. I've followed real estate for over 40 years, and I'm also a landlord. My main concern, like what scares me, is the just cause eviction. So I'm going to start with that. And I do think that we do need absolutely more housing, and it's supply and demand. So with the Renter Protection Subcommittee recommended that, you know, the goal of promoting greater awareness of rights and responsibilities, which the city of Seattle address that by simply requiring landlords to provide tenants with their rights when they signed a lease. What scares me, and I'm hoping that I'm misunderstanding this, is so for a for-cause eviction includes for a serious crime or violent felony which occurred during the tenancy and within 1,000 feet of the dwelling unit. So that means if it's like a quarter mile away and somebody is, you know, there's child molesters or brandishing a gun or whatever, that, you know, that's okay to have that person as a renter. For threat of violent crime, the threat would need to be will result in death or great bodily injury to another person with a specific intent, and it is so unequivocal, immediate, and specific as to convey to the person threatened. Sorry, but I don't want to sign up for that. There are, that I'm personally aware of, tenants who have engaged in suspected criminal activity, which is very difficult to prove, including neighbors complaining about, just 30 seconds, males, you know, people coming over. So you can't prove prostitution, gang, guns. People aren't going, they don't witness that except for the people that are involved. And finally, just with the, I say that this is rent control, even the mediation. The logic behind the consumer price index is because there's been a time when inflation has been 15, 16% in the 70s and 80s.
And thank you for your comments.
Good evening to all of you. My name is Tamara Trussell, and I've served as a mediator since 1987. Worked in the real estate, financial, environmental arena. One of my concerns about mediation with landlords and tenants is the balance of power and making sure that somebody addresses that. Who is going to talk about good faith mediation on the part of all parties? Is that going to be addressed? Mr. Gamblin, you said something about housing. Housing won't happen here if we do this. And my thought to you and the County of Marin is, how about we pave the way? We start something that nobody else is doing. My rent went up 40% last year, and I make a pretty decent wage, but 40% is ridiculous. And I don't want to go stand in front of a landlord and plead my cause. I want somebody to put restrictions on that and not add a clause that says basically, if we put restrictions on that, no one will want to build. I also agree with amending zoning in this county. It's really important. If we don't do some kind of amendment and make it creative and thoughtful about our environment, because we love it here, but also about the people who live here, we're losing people. We're losing people. I have a friend whose rent went up so high, she's leaving, not just the state, the country. I am serious. Mediation is clearly better than litigation. However, I think there are aspects of mediation that can end up being very unfair. If a person goes into a mediation with the idea that, yes, I can plead my cause, but this guy has the ultimate power, then what's the point? Okay?
Thank you.
That's my thoughts.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Tom Neville and I'm a landlord. I think it's great, this mediation and just cause thing. It's great that everyone's more secure and clear on everything they're doing. But considering the language in these ordinances is the majority of what we're going on, I'm just a bit concerned about the way we're handling tenant households and what their involvement is. So for on page 4, section B3, it talks about the tenant household's ability to kick out an offending tenant. And the process and structure of how this happens isn't clear. It doesn't say anything about it. Do they just vote between themselves who to kick off the island? Do they give a 30-day notice? If the original tenant leaves, is he still liable to pay for the rent? Does that fall onto the people who reside there? So I think it's not clear enough from the structure of this document how that would go through. And it seems to be that the rest of the household is stepping into the tenant's shoes. But do they have to have consent from the landlord? Do they need to sign a new lease? It's a bit vague in the majority of this document. And also that it extends to the civil liability that members of the tenant household are able to pursue action. But how do you prove that they stayed there and for what amount of time? Usually you use the lease, right? But if if they kick the last tenant out and they don't sign a lease, how does that work? So I just think it's a bit too ambiguous. That could be fleshed out a bit more, so we all know what's going to happen in the future, instead of showing up to court and having to have a judge decide what it all means. That's just my thoughts.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Wendy, and for right now I live in Marin, and I've been here for over 10 years and in the Bay Area for over 20 years, and I'm one of the people that's being affected by the rental crisis and unfair evictions, not without cause, and rent raises that are beyond 5 and 10%. And there's many of us who you're not going to hear from all over Marin County, and especially in San Rafael. There are a lot of renters that have already lost their homes and have left here, and there are many of us who are struggling to stay here. And the rental crisis, the housing crisis we have is real. It's been going on for a while, and I haven't seen much done about it, even though we say it's a crisis. So I appreciate that San Rafael is finally taking some step towards dealing with housing for people. And I appreciate that you went down to the 5% for all renters. I strongly wish that you would consider just cause also for all renters and not just units over 3. And I also completely agree with the comments from MOC members and Legal Aid and Fair Housing and others. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, my name is Aidan O'Sullivan. I'm the owner and manager of 60 units in San Rafael. During the last 15 or 20 years, I've had to evict about 8 residents. The majority of these evictions were people who were creating a disturbance to other tenants on the property. It was difficult to make a case against them. It was difficult to get a witness to go to court and testify, especially when these other tenants that were being victimized were threatened. Threatened with tires being slashed, threatened with windows being broken, and even their children threatened on their way to school. Being able to just give a 60-day notice was a way that I could help keep a situation on the property that was habitable for the tenants and was manageable for me. So I would like to take that situation into account when you make your decision. With reference to, it is difficult when people are being evicted for high cost of rent. But one has to remember the cost of housing. Even to remodel an apartment, even to remodel in a kitchen at the moment, 2 months rent, remodel a kitchen and change out the Zinsco panel. 2 months rent go to the actual permit for that, to create that situation. And we got to remember that the majority of the housing in Marin County is 50+ years old. It needs work. So yes, landlords do gouge people, but property owners need to have a just reward if they're going to maintain the properties in a habitable condition. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, council members, my name is Omar Carrera. I'm the CEO of Canal Alliance. We are also a landlord in the canal. I want to appreciate for the invitation to talk with Andrew, with the mayor and others about the potential solution for a housing crisis. I was pleased to hear tonight from multiple people, including from the landlords and the tenants, that we have a housing crisis. And we have a housing crisis we're not going to find the perfect solution to resolve that. I agree with John about building more housing. I'm looking forward for those conversations where we come with solutions to develop affordable housing in San Rafael. I also want to say that I'm not going to be using tonight an extreme case of a bad landlord or a bad tenant to really deny or approve a policy that will serve the majority of the residents in the city of San Rafael. I don't know how can we be against mediation. How can we be against the clarifying of the rule by just cause eviction? I don't know. I don't understand why we are opposed to this. I really wanted to encourage you to approve tonight just cause eviction and mandatory mediation for all the tenants in the city of San Rafael. Thank you.
Thanks, Omar. Anyone else? Len, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. My name is Len Rifkind. I'm a local attorney in the county, practiced landlord-tenant law here for almost 30 years. Come from a family that has been blessed and to have lived in this county for a long time and is owner of multifamily housing stock that was purchased decades and decades ago. So as landlords, we have a different economic position than someone who buys an apartment today, because the person who buys an apartment today has old housing stock that needs to be fixed up. They weren't pride of, maybe they're buying housing stock that wasn't pride of ownership, like my family is fortunate enough to be able to do, and keep the property up so that it's not having to be done at all one time. Our property tax rate is low, relatively speaking. If you think $120,000 of property tax is a low number. And so the issue here for the council that you have to address is you have two ordinances before you, both the just cause and the mediation. I spend my life going to mediation as an attorney. It's very, very effective. That said, I'm not seeing how a mandatory mediation clause works in this case. Why? Because you're asked to adopt legislation and ordinance that less than 1% of the people are using. I don't understand why you would adopt an ordinance that clearly across the board in multiple jurisdictions no one is using. So I don't see that. On just cause, the speaker that spoke just a few before me, the problem tenant really is an issue. I can't tell you how many times that I've represented owners in the canal and there's a serious threat that occurs by not so great people on other tenants, and they're scared to testify. And so with a just cause eviction ordinance, may I have just 30 more seconds, Mr. Mayor? With a just cause eviction ordinance, it's not going to cover that problem. We don't have statistics of the Marin County Superior Court that evictions are going up. They're actually going down. Please don't adopt an ordinance for something that I'm not perceiving as a problem. The solution clearly is more ADUs, more JDUs, where their single-family homes allow duplexes and fourplexes to be built in their spot in appropriate locations. Collaborate with all the other cities in the county here so that it's across the board. The county builds more housing in these things, more stack and pack housing on arterials. That is the true solution, not the Band-Aids you're being asked to do tonight.
And could you wrap it up, Len?
Wrapped up. More housing is the answer. Please do not approve this legislation tonight that's before you, these ordinances. They will not solve the problem. They are mere Band-Aids. Thank you.
And thank you. Anyone else? Seeing no one, return to council for questions, follow-up, and a motion.
I had one question.
Yes,
I don't know if it's to the subcommittee or so first of all, thank everyone for coming out again and giving us additional input. My question is about the copy of eviction notices, because I know that's something that you two had talked about. Could you just clarify and speak to that a little bit? Because I think that's where we're different from the county ordinance, right?
A little bit, and
Yeah.
why don't you go ahead?
Well, I think this falls broadly in the category of data collection, which a number of people spoke to here this evening. We decided fairly early on when we were working on what recommendations to make based upon the feedback we got, comparing our resources to the counties, looking at the special needs of San Rafael versus the needs across the county, and we determined that the data collection that the county is imposing on landlords within the county's jurisdiction didn't make sense for us for a couple of reasons. One is we weren't convinced that we could resource it effectively, which then begged the question, what does effectiveness mean? And we, in our outreach to people, asked repeatedly, what would we do with the data that we would be collecting? Were we able to resource it? In other words, if we could devote the staff time and put together systems in order to collect from every landlord who engages in an eviction action all the data behind that tenant, the unit, the eviction history, the tenancy history, what use could we put it to? And we could not come up with a set of answers that justified that expenditure of resources. Now, it may turn out that the county over time or other jurisdictions does come up with some effective use of that data, at which point we're not prevented from going back and addressing it in this ordinance, just as there are a number of other items we've heard this evening that we certainly can go back and tinker with if we find that what we're proposing here is not as effective as it could be.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that it was, for us, it was largely a matter of the cost of record keeping. We don't have a HAS department, and therefore it'd fall upon current employees, and didn't feel that that burden was something we wished to place upon them. Particularly considering what would you do with the information, it'd be limited. Broadly speaking, if this matter does pass, which I assume it will, but if it does pass, we're going to take a period of time, probably the next year, to really look at it and see if it needs to be refined. It's not an absolute, but rather evolving, and that could be one of the issues. So it's a good question, certainly. And if it proves that we should maintain those records, or perhaps there's a more expeditious way to do so, with the county's assistance or some other means, then we'll probably modify it if it seems right. That's a good question, certainly. Yeah, John. Oh, Andrew, sorry.
If I could, I'd like to respond to a few of the comments that were made this evening, because I think there's a little bit of either misunderstanding or misinformation that might be percolating through the community of folks who have reviewed what we've done. First of all, just by way of background, we've spent a fair bit of time looking at this, and much of our examination of the issues is based upon data that we collected from all of you, as well as from very specific stakeholders and the folks at the county. And we came up with the recommendations we did, and they're represented in the draft ordinances before us this evening, based upon an understanding that there will be differences between our needs, that is the needs of the community in San Rafael, and the needs of the county. So I'm going to address a handful of specific points here, and I'm going to start off with chiding a couple of the speakers this evening, because we're hearing two things this evening. We're hearing, thank you for getting very close to what the county originally adopted, and we commend you for doing so because it will ensure greater consistency and clarity between landlords, tenants, and the governing jurisdiction. And we think, in fact, you should go all the way to the county to mirror what the county has done. But where apparently the county has fallen short is it has not required with its just cause ordinance that all units be covered. And so we're being asked, in fact, to depart from the county and cover all units with our just cause ordinance, where we were actually quite proud of ourselves for mirroring the county. So for those of you smiling, you know very well what's happening here. We can't accomplish everything for everyone. I suppose that's my point, and I'm not here to make fun or make light of the sincerity of people's comments. I'm really pointing out that we were engaged in a very difficult balancing act between the legitimate needs of landlords and those of tenants. And so I want to make an open invitation here to everyone, but in particular the landlord folks who feel especially aggrieved because they may be on the receiving end of legislation they were hoping very much not to see in San Rafael. I'm happy to meet with any of you, and I will address myself to Len Rivkind in particular. It's good to see you up there, Len. You haven't been in these proceedings earlier, but I'm happy to sit down and talk through a number of the modifications we made to the county's ordinance that we think addresses the more significant concerns that landlords might have had with the ordinance had we mirrored the county's language. I'm also happy to talk to tenants and tenants organizations, because I think we did very important work in clarifying some of the language that the county had that we think will be beneficial to the processes of mandatory mediation and just cause. A couple of specifics. The comment was made by our first speaker that we're covering only the first year of the mediation costs, and thereafter we're apportioning those costs to the parties. That's not, in fact, what we're doing. We're pledging to cover the first year of the mediation costs, and thereafter we will determine how best to apportion costs. Those costs may still be apportioned to the city. We may remove a cost structure by coming up with a volunteer panel. We may apportion them equally between tenants and landlords. We don't know yet, but we're committing to fund this for the first year. There was significant commentary about the burden of proving illegal conduct or threats of violence and the like. And the commentary, while mostly from the landlord side, also came a little from the tenant side, folks who are concerned that they may be living in a community where there are people who are misbehaving, and how do you remove misbehavior and keep good folks in place? We think we improved upon the county there. As some of you may know if you read the county's ordinance, the county requires for just cause that a conviction take place for illegal activity before a landlord may use that as a basis for an eviction. As you can probably surmise, convictions can be hard to come by, especially when witnesses don't come forward. We removed the conviction requirement so that a landlord, if he or she has sufficient confidence that illegal activity has taken place, can remove an offending tenant on that basis, with some risk, however, that if illegal activity did not take place, then the person removed can go to court and get their tenancy reinstated. We think that strikes a finer balance than what the county provided. There were comments about some of the language being difficult for landlords to ascertain the meaning of. I think we can probably do better than we've indicated in the staff report. I think, assuming this passes, we can provide, if not templates or formalized guidance, we can provide some documentation that will assist landlords in navigating this ordinance alongside the counties, and it will help them in their notice requirements to their tenants so that all parties, landlords and tenants, understand how they're to behave with these ordinances in place in San Rafael. I think that's my comments for now.
Okay. John, did you have a comment?
Thank you. Follow-up question. I've asked this a couple of times in the previous meetings to make sure that I'm completely understanding the process. We have a mandatory mediation that's non-binding. So walk me through, if you can, Andrew, how this would look. And first, I understand that anything over the 5% is presented would allow for a tenant to request mandatory mediation. And then it goes into the part about mediating in good faith. That's where I need to understand what would be determined, good faith or not good faith. If the question is strictly on the amount of the rent increase, how much documentation or evidence would a landlord need to provide that would be able to justify their rent increase that they're seeking that the tenant feels is not appropriate? And what would qualify as mediating in good faith along those lines?
I might actually defer to Councilmember McCullough or Rob on this, just because that was kind of more of a legal issue.
So, to be very clear, the good faith requirement in the mediation context does not require that the proposed increase be made in good faith. It simply means that the mediation, that is the interaction of the parties in discussing that increase, be done in good faith. The parties show up on time, they actually talk about the issues, they spend the time going back and forth, and then when they finally end the mediation, they've had a genuine conversation. That's all the good faith requirement applies to. The increase itself may be any amount that the landlord so chooses after that mediation process is done.
And there is no requirement in this bargaining or this interaction for the landlord to justify their request?
No, but there is an expectation. There's a requirement that the landlord will converse in good faith about it, which would mean talking about the increase, not necessarily justifying it or rationalizing it on a dollars and cents basis, but talking about the increase and listening to the tenant and the tenant's concerns.
Right, and then further on to this piece, and you can answer, in terms of not to extend past 30 days. So if a mediation takes place over a number of days, and both are bargaining or mediating in good faith per the definition, and there is no binding result out of this, that the rent could be whatever the landlord deemed that they felt necessary to cover whatever costs, improvements, or just they wanted to increase it and the market dictated that they could.
Correct.
Then that would be considered mediating in good faith, and they could implement a rent increase of 10 or 15%. And if the tenant was unable to pay that, then even with a just cause eviction, would allow them to evict that tenant for lack of payment, because that would be a just cause. I'm wanting to make sure, I'm not trying to make light of this, I'm just wanting to make sure that I understand exactly what a process could be.
So you've exposed the salient weakness in both of these ordinances, which is there's no guarantee to the tenant that a significant or an outsized increase in rent will not be coming their way, despite these processes that are put in place in order to decelerate these increases. It is certainly a possibility.
Right, and I wasn't trying to make light of that in any way, shape, or form. I just want to make sure that everybody is fully aware, because what we've heard is that there appears to be, by the commentary, that there will be these protections put into place should the council pass these ordinances. And in reality, and we've heard in previous meetings that, yes, for rent control, and again, reiterating that this is not a rent control. There is no part in the ordinance that says that the landlord cannot charge a 10%, or in case of some of the folks that came up and spoke this evening, a 40% increase if they wanted to, and if they attended the mediation, the mandatory mediation, they could still institute those increases. And if the tenant was not able to pay that, or decided not to, that would be a justification to provide a 60-day notice, or whatever the normal requirement is for eviction on those pieces. So I just want to make it very clear that these ordinances as proposed are not going to be the catch-all, and I don't want anybody to leave here. It is my opinion that these ordinances were passed tonight, from hearing from my fellow council members up on the dais, that I want people, if that is the case, when they leave here tonight, not to just assume that there will not be any rent increases in San Rafael over the limit of 5% within a 12-month period. That there will not be the ability for landlords to increase rents to a level that they feel that they need to manage their investments the way that they choose to. So thank you for both for clarifying that, and then on my comments on this. And so I just don't believe that the process that what we're doing today is, excuse me,
please.
I don't believe that the ordinances will do anything other than they will be written on a piece of paper that might make some feel that they're getting adequate protections against further rent increases, and that it'll be a cost that will be borne by the city and then potentially future by landlords and by tenants to do these mediations, when there is no requirement that any of the outcomes actually take place unless they're mutually agreed upon. And that could happen. That could happen, but there is no guarantees that will. I will go back and to address Mr. Corey there, that yes, we need housing. Yes, we need to change a lot of our zoning restrictions, and it's not just for market rate housing or high income housing. It's for all types of housing. And one of the things that we've heard from developers in this area when they've come to us with projects to get approved, that if they were allowed to go up another story or two, that the cost for them to build is significantly decreased because they're not adding any additional land to their purchase. So the cost per door to build can be significantly reduced, and thus it makes it more affordable for them to build more affordable housing. But yet when we get projects submitted to us or get appealed to us on the city council level, they're usually appealed because they say there's too much. There's too much housing. It's too big for our area. It's changing the character of San Rafael. Well, we can't have it both ways. You know, we have projects that get submitted for 300 units that get whittled down to 182. We get projects that get submitted for 140 and get whittled down to 96. And each time those things get whittled down, so do the number of affordable units that go with it. So while it's great that everybody's out here advocating for these protections, as I've said from the very beginning, I don't believe we have a rental issue in Marin County. I believe we have a housing stock issue and the right kind of housing and a good mix of the housing. We do need more affordable housing, but we also need regular market rate housing as well, because there are plenty of people that want to live in Marin, and we've seen that. We've been told that we're about 1,000 to 1,500 units short in Marin. And if we're not building those, and I asked, you know, Paul Jensen a couple meetings ago of how many units we've actually built, and the number is in the double digits, not in the triple digits or the 4 digits or 5 digits. It's in the double digits over the last 5+ years. And while we may have permitted a number of these units for being built, they're not being built. And I don't know all the reasons why landlords or developers are buying properties and going through the process of getting the permits and going through the process of getting all the entitlements and then not building, other than when I talk to them, they say it's too expensive. That they, you know, that they have they don't have the wherewithal to pencil it out for their bottom line, and you can agree or disagree with that, to build more of these units with the way that with our zoning is restrictive. Now, I'm not talking about building 15 stories in downtown, but I'm also looking at projects that were presented here and appealed to us, and the developer needed to switch those to something that could pencil out for them rather than building more housing units. So you'll see a number of these senior facilities being built in San Rafael, or being approved to be built. I've yet to see any of these break ground yet, but that will be something that I think that we need to work on when we talk about going bold and going big, is really addressing the root of the problem, which is the lack of total units, market rate, middle market, affordable, all of them. So those are my comments.
Okay.
Thank you, and again, thank you all for coming out, not only to this meeting, but to the previous meeting, as well as the many emails that we received. And I agree with some of what Councilmember Gamblin said about that this is a small tool. You know, it's not the perfect tool, but to me, passing it, and I support, as written by the staff, I support these because it shows that we do care about our renters. And at this meeting, you didn't get into, or Andrew didn't get into who the renters are as much. We did talk about it last meeting, but just to remind us all, because tonight we were talking more about the changes from last time. In San Rafael, 48% of folks rent. 48%. That's huge. I mean, this is significant. And those are people that are here now. And when I went back and looked at census data, and boy, you can spend a lot of time clicking through there, that number has increased since the year 2000. So we're actually getting more renters, and more people are being affected. And yeah, we need all types of housing. I mean, I agree 100% with that, and many of you come out when those projects come before us, and we appreciate that. But these renter protections, someone said this evening so eloquently, I'll have to give them the credit. These are for the people that are here now, that are living here now, in San Rafael now. These are our neighbors. So for me, it is crucial that we show people that are here now, hey, we want you here. You're part of our community and you're important to us. What we talked about again at the other meeting, and this really impacted me, so I just want to make sure to bring it up again, is that the median household income of homeowners is higher than that of renters. So they're different. These are different groups of people. And often renters are more likely to be people of color, people who are older, people who have disabilities, or have lower incomes. So it's important that we put these renter protections in place to support everybody in our community who might not have the power or the platform to advocate for themselves. That's what we're doing up here. We didn't talk again, but I got to bring it up, how renters are increasingly burdened by rising rents. So when you talk about that rent burdening, the difference between what your rent costs and what your wages are, those numbers are going up, not just in San Rafael, but throughout the Bay Area. And, you know, in closing, these are small tools. I get that, but they're important tools, and they're the right first step to our community to say, hey, you renters are a big part of our community, and we want you to stay here. We want to enable a good relationship or a good conversation to take place between you and your landlord. So I also want to close by thanking the subcommittee. I know the two of you met with others that were there more than once and really hammered out the details. Vice Mayor McCullough's knowledge of the details is breathtaking to me. I'm so grateful that you really drilled down on that. And I'm glad that our ordinance now more closely matches the county. We're going in the right direction, and I'm gratified to hear that in a year or so, or as the mayor said, if we want to come back and look at it and tweak it and change it even better, we're willing to do that. So this is a huge, important first step for the city of San Rafael, and I'm delighted to support it.
Thank you, everyone, for helping us work our way through this as a community. That was really our objective, is how we can deal with this as one large body that's affected by the matter before us. I know that mediation works. I can cite a specific example that came before me, brought to me by the MOU not too very long ago, where rents went up substantially, like almost doubled. And that was catastrophic because it was over a short period of time, 30 days, with eviction notices. And so what became of that, in fact, was mediation, not prescribed by our ordinance, but rather by those who were affected and others that recognized the situation and brought it primarily to the owner's attention through their attorney, and also through David Levin from Marin Legal Aid. And basically the two of them, not so much me, but the two of them working out something that, while it wasn't perfect for either side, it was better for both. And therefore I said I can cite that as one example. I think it's probably more attuned to situations of smaller units where you have tenants, and the owners probably know the tenants and so forth, and by us as a community make a strong statement that we want you to sit down and work out something so it's not a hardship on either side. And there will be differences. I sort of get apartments and improving them, which we hope that takes place for all in our community, and the result of that is you've got more investment, and therefore I think we would all agree you're entitled to a higher rate of return on that encourages that kind of renovation. But it's a difficult balance right now. It's a really hard balance because of the points that have been made by others up here. Because in fact, as a community, and we're not the standalone community, throughout California, I would suggest, we're experiencing this where salaries are stagnant to some degree, rents are going up for various reasons, supply is not. Here in Marin County, we hoard our open space, which creates less opportunity for building, if you view it that way, and so we're all in the same boat. If the cost of land wasn't so much, supply and demand once again, then perhaps more affordable housing we built. We don't build houses, folks. We don't do that. Now, we have a say in approvals, et cetera, but it's the real world out there of contractors and landowners, and they're the ones that bring projects before us. And John is absolutely right. We'll start with, not we, but a developer will start with a project of 186 units. I'm making these numbers up, and before you know it, it's 130. And that has both pros and cons, and it's for the community to make a decision as to where it wishes to lie in that range. I do think that this is evolving. I once again thank Andrew for his involvement and expertise in bringing this to us. But I do think that it can be improved upon with the experience that we might have over the next year or so. Let's see how it works. There may be some hiccups with regard to definitions and understanding and the mere mechanics of it, but let's see how it works and see if we can improve it. But let's at least get started with a process that gets us to a better place, I think, ultimately. It's not rent control. If anybody thinks it is, they're deadly mistaken. It is not rent control. It is not a means of saying to the apartment owners or dwelling owners, that we up here are going to set the rents. We're not going to do that under this ordinance, certainly. And I suspect we won't be doing that because of their other consequences. So it's not rent control, and don't expect it to be. Again, you're going to have to work out any variances or differences in the amount you pay or the amount that you receive for your rent. Balance, mediation, county. I'm pleased that we're reasonably close to the county. I do think that Andrew is correct, that we've improved upon it. It's subtle. It's not perhaps obvious, but there are some improvements, I think, in this. And again, I would hope that we wouldn't consider this to be a final document, but rather one we can experience and improve upon. And we do have a year threshold. Nobody else stepped up. The apartment owners didn't step up to pay for this, and the tenants are not stepping up. So we thought the appropriate thing would be for the city to step up during this exploratory period, and let's sort out how that might be changed as well. Because the city more than likely isn't going to continue this year after year after year. It's between the owners and the tenants. So we'll have to work on that too. So with that, unless there are further comments, I would entertain a motion.
Well, I'd like to make a motion, but I just want to confirm that the draft of I think it's the mandatory mediation ordinance in particular, that when it was first attached to the agenda packet last week, still was undergoing some last-minute revisions. And I want to make sure that as finally revised, we're in fact acting on that version.
That is correct.
That version might have not emerged until Friday, is that right?
I believe it was Thursday afternoon.
Was it Thursday afternoon?
Yes,
okay.
it was.
Okay, great. Then that being the case, I would move that we, well, where am I? I move that we pass the ordinance to print as it relates to, well, let me read the ordinance. The consideration of an ordinance of the City of San Rafael City Council adding new Chapter 10.100 to the San Rafael Municipal Code entitled Rental Housing Dispute Resolution.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Collin.
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin.
No.
Vice Mayor McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, matter carries 3-1. And
I move that we pass the following ordinance to print. Consideration of an ordinance of the City of San Rafael City Council adding new Chapter 10.105 to the San Rafael Municipal Code entitled Cause Required for Eviction.
Second.
moved and second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Collin.
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin.
No.
Vice Mayor McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, matter carries 3-1. We'll move on to item 6. Thank you, everyone. You're right. It's okay, really. I'm sorry, come in. Now it'll go to print. It'll return to us for final. Let's see. It what? When did it come? 30 days? Yeah, 30 days. Yes. So that'll be probably the 17th, and then 30 days after that. Sure, of course. We're losing him, Paul. Okay, gentlemen.
Good evening, Mayor Phillips and City Council members. I'm here tonight with Rafat Ray, our Deputy Public Works Director, and we're here to present an informational report on transportation methodologies I realize this is not a very exciting topic unless, of course, you're a city planner or the city traffic engineer. But I have to say it's very timely for two reasons. One, we are updating or actually preparing our General Plan 2040. So we are doing a deep dive in our circulation element where all of this is embedded. And secondly, there's a state law that's been passed that's critical to the California Environmental Quality Act, and we'll cover that in the presentation. So just to give you an overview of what's covered in the informational report, a history of traffic planning and management in San Rafael, Senate Bill 743, which is the law that was passed by the governor in 2013, the introduction of what's called vehicle miles traveled. This is a new methodology that's being looked at for traffic assessment. Options for level of service, that's something that we've been operating on for many, many years. And then the next steps. And as I mentioned, this is an informational report. It's somewhat of a complicated topic and very detailed. So we're going to be presenting this to you in several meetings. And this is just the introduction. So I'd like to start with some history. In 1983, the city started using level of service and was introduced to coordinate traffic management with land development, and this was tested in the Northgate area of San Rafael, the Northgate Activity Center plan, which actually resulted in most of the development in and around the Northgate area and Smith Ranch. What level of service does is that it grades intersections and arterials. You're familiar with level of service A through level of service F. Level of service A is a free flow of traffic. F is typically referred to as gridlock. And the difference between those is usually a quantified amount of delay that it takes for people to get through an intersection or an arterial. Level of service has been universally used for vehicle movement assessment and traffic and CEQA review throughout the state of California, and it's embedded in not only in our current general plan, but in the past general plan that we had through 2004. So just to give you an idea on our current policies, we have a level of service D standard citywide for our intersections and arterials. You've heard of this before. We have a standard of E, level of service E for downtown, and for a couple of selected areas that are traffic challenged. The standard is maintained through implementing planned transportation improvements. Those planned transportation improvements, which are essentially mitigation, are usually street widening, right turn lanes, and then there's some other grand improvements that are in the general plan, like retooling the the Freitas interchange. A lot of this is fed by traffic mitigation fees, which are very costly. I would like to say this is one of the things that is a constraint to housing development, is our traffic fees are very high. We charge for both AM and PM peak hour traffic generation. So, Senate Bill 743 came along. It was signed by the governor in 2013. And what this bill does is it focuses a change in traffic methodology, looking primarily at greenhouse gas emission reduction. And the major changes occur with the CEQA guidelines, the California Environmental Quality Act, and of course that's what we use to do environmental review here in San Rafael, whether it's preparing an EIR or exempting a project from a CEQA review. What this bill and this law has done is that it phases out level of service for analyzing traffic and circulation impacts in all environmental documents, and it replaces it with a new metric. What's being used in the Bay Area is called vehicle miles traveled, and I'll explain that to you in a few minutes. The second part of this law is that it exempts transit-oriented development in transit priority areas. We have two transit priority areas in San Rafael. They're the areas around the two SMART stations, but that's if the projects are covered by a specific plan. We do not have any specific plans in San Rafael. However, we are headed in that direction in downtown with the effort of the Downtown Precise Plan, which is a close equivalent to a specific plan. So what we have to do by mid-2020 is to adopt a VMT model, much like our level of service model. That's folded into our general plan EIR. So this is very timely because it coincides perfectly with the timing of our general plan. So what is VMT, or vehicle miles traveled? It measures the amount and distance of vehicle travel, origin and destination, that's attributed to a project or use. So basically, the longer the distance, the greater the impact. What it does is it assesses the effects of a project on regional traffic and use, so it doesn't focus on local intersections and local traffic movement through our street network. Generally, what this does is it favors projects that are close to transit or close to employment. So if you have a housing development that's close to employment or close to transit, it generates far less vehicle miles traveled than, let's say, a project in West Marin of an equivalent size, a housing project. So one of the things that we're doing is we've hired Fair and Peers, who is working on our general plan as our traffic consultants. They're they're close to completing a white paper, which should be available in about a month. And what it's going to do is it's going to identify what model is most appropriate, a VMT model, that is most appropriate for San Rafael, one, to identify thresholds of significance that we can consider for our general plan update, and then also mitigation measures. So that's in the works, and that's phase 2 of our coming back to you. So I would like to note what SB 743 law does not do. It does not assess vehicle trip impacts on the road network like what LOS does. It does not affect existing traffic fee programs, so we can continue to charge traffic fees to fund local improvements. We just can't link it back to CEQA or the California Environmental Quality Act. It does not prevent local jurisdictions from considering capacity and congestion issues in transit priority areas. It does not prevent us from assessing growth, and it doesn't prevent us from continuing to use LOS as a management tool. And this is a segue for my introduction here to Rafat, because he's going to summarize, which is summarized in our informational report, and that is we have options to level of service, and this is where we will want some feedback from the City Council.
Good evening, Mayor Phillips, members of the Council. I agree with Paul. This is an introductory topic, but I disagree with him. This is the most exciting thing. It's not a boring topic.
We'll let you guys work that out.
You know, just as an introduction, the level of service is a microscopic tool, meaning that every time we look at the intersection, we had to do turning movement counts, look at each approach, and that is extensive and it's resources depleting process. It also leaves a big unknown for developments. A developer come into town, they don't know what their liability might be depending on this study that's going to take 3 to 6 months. And we must stop using it as a performance measure for CEQA, but there's nothing that prohibits us from using it as a tool. And what I mean as a tool is that when we want to probe into a specific area and focus on few intersections that we know that are going to be affected, we will have the ability to do that. At the same time, we used level of service, and you know, I've been running it for 30 years. It's been used as the threshold, the level of significance, it's everything. So we have an opportunity now, and that's what we're here talking about, and we've been discussing it at length with many members of the staff and our consultants. We have a golden opportunity to establish a management and monitoring system of local traffic. And that's what people want. That's what decision makers want. They don't, maybe they understand the A to F on the surface because of the report card, but it's a very intensive process. So we have a golden opportunity. We have all of the experience with Paul, seeing many general plans come through, Bob Grandy, with Fear and Peers. Fear and Peers is leading the path for many agencies in establishing this. What our goals and directions to our consultants is to come up with an easy to implement and predict by the development community, that monitoring system. Easy to understand by us, staff, decision makers, and all of the stakeholders. You know, when a resident when is looking at a development coming in, they need to understand what that do to their street network. And we want to make sure that it's logical, equitable, and nexus-driven. And based on multimodal and well-funded improvement program, we have the well-funded improvement program, the traffic impact fee, and has been contributing to a lot of multimodal improvements, but we never say it in the general plan. The level of service looks at vehicle delay only, and it's an average delay. So you can be looking at an intersection at a level of service E or D with an approach of a level of service F, and we can't do anything about it. And that might be the subject of concern for a nearby resident or a neighborhood. So here are the options, and all of this is going to be cleared up, and I agree it's a little complicated. You know, it's going to be presented in a white paper that Paul was referring to. We'll start with these 4 options. These 4 options, we're seeking general direction from the council at this point. There's going to be a mix and match option, so that there could be a hybrid. If you like a concept and you want us to see how it might fit in the big picture, that's the kind of feedback that we want to do. Arterial delay index is a macroscopic analysis. It looks at an arterial. It doesn't look at each and every intersection, but it gets to the bottom line of how long do I need to go from A, how long does it take me to get from A to B? Or what is the speed of the arterial? And the beauty about this delay index, it could be articulated as a level of service. So we can go A, B, and C, and we can all agree on the metric, what is A and what is F. So a typical example of this is, let's say we would look at the whole city and take about 5 or 6 arterials that are essential to the city traffic movement. And we would measure and calculate the uncongested speed and divide that by the congested speed. As long as we don't double the, you know, we're not less than half of the uncongested speed, that's a good thing. So that could be a level service A. And as we get close to you know, conditions get worsened, we can articulate it as A, B, and C, and D as we see fit. A project that will be cleared locally if the expected travel times after the project is maintained, we won't do any more checking into the arterial. We get, and I want to stop here and explain the whole concept of preparing general plans. When we prepare a general plan, we assume a future development, and it's all on guesswork. And we do an EIR, environmental impact report, for the full assessment of the impact of that growth, basically. And then at the same time, every time we have a project, we put them through the grinder of analyzing everything again, and then analyzing everything. And it's not a trivial time and money. We have EIRs or traffic analysis that can go up to $300,000-$400,000. And so this creates or introduces a concept that is simple, easy to understand, and we believe it meets the criteria that we were talking about logical, equitable, and nexus-driven, and we can continue to do the traffic impact fee based on the trip generation, so it'll be equitable. Another option is the trip monitoring, and I go back to how we prepared general plans. The traffic model that informs the general plan is a complex tool, and in each area of the city, there is something called the traffic analysis zone, which is a boundary. And in each traffic analysis zone, the model says, this is what we have now, this is how many jobs, this is how many housing we have in this area, and then it goes and say, in the future, we think that it has a potential development of there. We basically assume the growth in that model. This is a process where if we want to monitor how growth is happening in the city, we can go back and combine traffic analysis zones and make the city into maybe 5 to 10 segments of combination of TAZs. And then we would check if we are not getting where we said we want to go with the general plan. We assume 100% growth basically. As long as we're at a percentile that is comfortable to the policymakers, we can be safe. We don't need to analyze, and that's an important tool that could be used in combination with the local arterial system that was previous to this, to assure our residents and decision makers that we're not even there yet. We don't need to be there. At the same time, we're doing the traffic improvements. We haven't stopped doing traffic improvements. As we collect fees, we continue to do, and then that could be used as a clearinghouse for projects. The third option is the status quo, maintaining the level of service. You heard how we feel about it. It's microscopic. It continues, and we can continue to use it. We have seen many agencies that says, well, we're not ready to leave that. Or we could say, you know, a scenario for San Rafael could be that let's spare the downtown 54 intersections of the mill of analyzing every movement every time. Let's adopt a delay index in the downtown. But if there is a sensitive areas, we could maintain the level of service for other areas. So we have the opportunity to do so. The other option that many agencies have adopted is we just do VMT only, vehicle miles travel only. We established the threshold for San Rafael, and as projects come in, we do what we say it's a parking and circulation analysis. It's not a full-blown traffic study. We just look at the parking and how the parking flows, what is the accuracy of the parking, and then we do a circulation to make sure that everyone is able to get in and out. A much lesser scope of work for the traffic study. So these are the 4 options, and I think it's an information report. We started very early bringing this topic to you, so we can give you a chance to think about. The white paper is going to be explaining in much more depth what we just explained. With that, Mr. Mayor, I'll leave it.
Thanks for making it perfectly clear, at least to perhaps the others.
Thank you.
Tell me about VMT units. I'm trying to equate something that tells me this is good or that's bad, but what are the units?
It's vehicle miles traveled per capita. And
per capita?
Per capita.
Per capita being?
I would call Bob Randy, if you don't mind, and having a thorough explanation of what VMT and what does it do.
Hello, Bob Grandy with Fair Peers. So VMT is typically calculated by taking the daily trips that are generated by any use and then multiplying by the trip length for that use. So if it's a housing project, we would look at all the trips generated coming to and from that household. That would include trips made by the residents of the household and also trips made by, for instance, delivery people. So anybody actually accessing that home by vehicle.
Do you have the data to do that?
Excuse me?
Do we have the data to do that, to make that calculation?
It's a very good question. We have a lot of different surveys that are collected at the national level, at the state level, that are done, that have data at the local level in San Rafael. So there's other ways of getting at that data by obtaining information through, for instance, mobile device units, which everybody carries in their cell phone, and we can use that to actually trap trip links. So there's lots of different ways to get at that data, but it's a very good question because with any tool or any method you use, we're constantly getting better about how to get data. And I would say for basic uses like residential and office, it's easier than getting into more complex uses like a mixed-use development project and so forth. But yes, the typical tool we would use is the model that is being developed at this point by TAM for Marin County. It builds off the regional model, much more detailed in Marin, and so it's being validated to Marin conditions. We'll actually improve upon that model for San Rafael as part of the general plan work to validate it even to be a better model for the purposes of San Rafael. So that's the tool that would be used as new projects come forward to evaluate their VMT.
So if you have a project and let's say there are two projects similar, and one VMT is, I guess the units are miles. If the units of one project, let's say BioMarin, is 30 miles, and another is some other business, and it's 10 miles, would you draw the, oversimplifying I realize, but would you draw the conclusion that the other business compared to BioMarin is 3 times better?
Maybe if I could take it from a locational standpoint, so if you put an office building in downtown next to the transit center versus, say, in Terra Linda, where it doesn't have good access to transit, the project in the downtown area would have access to transit, it'd have a higher level of transit usage, a higher level of pedestrian, walking and biking. So therefore the actual vehicle trips generated would be lower, and the trip lengths tend to be shorter as well. So from a VMT perspective, a project in the downtown, that exact identical project in the downtown would have a lower VMT characteristic, generating characteristic, than a project somewhere outside the downtown where people are primarily going to drive because there's more vehicle trips being generated to those sites, and they tend to be longer trips. So it's a complicating factor. So as you, a compounding factor. So as you move away from areas where you have good transit, good walkability, you tend to have higher VMT. This all gets back to the state's original legislative intent, which was to encourage infill and reduce GHG emissions, and to increase transit, walking, and bike use. And so essentially the VMT does almost the inverse of level of service. Level of service, when you apply it to that project in the downtown, which tends to be more congested because there's more population density, you tend to have more level of service impacts and mitigation. Take that same project out on the periphery where there's lighter traffic levels, there tend to be less impacts from a level of service standpoint. VMT is the inverse. It would say a project in the core has less impact than a project at the periphery. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, it's complex, and I guess we'll all work our way through it. The nice thing about level of service that we've become accustomed to, most of us anyway, you can relate to it. A sounds pretty good, and F doesn't sound so great. And I think that's what most of our residents are concerned about, the intersection. Is it an A or an F? Because they're going to have to suffer their way through it, and the VMT doesn't, it feels to me, and at least until we've become more accustomed perhaps, it doesn't seem to me it conveys the same bit of information in a simplified way. So I'm leaning towards both, quite frankly, because I understand we have to do it, but I also think it's not as intuitive as the other might be.
You're absolutely correct, and I think what Rafael was talking about was one thing the state legislation doesn't do is it does not prevent you from having a level of service policy still in the general plan. So you can still have that policy, and it can be carried through into the entitlement process, just not through CEQA. So if you wanted to retain level of service in your general plan, if you want to retain it as a basis for the impact fee, the transportation impact fee program, you can do that. And that's what Rafael was talking about, was this option of using either the actual intersection level of service, which is the most complex and time-consuming of the level of service options. The other end of the spectrum, which is a little more simplified, is the arterial delay option that Rafael was mentioning, which is a way to more simply get at that issue of congestion and what the effects of a project are on maybe a simpler approach to that or less time-consuming.
And I thank you. I want to get a few more questions, but let me open up to others. No. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So how, if we adopt a new model, that is, we move away from the existing level of service model, how do we reconcile the dictates of the new model with for example, the conditions of use that we've placed upon existing projects? So we have a whole built environment where we have conditional use permits that have been founded on, in part, level of service calculations. And if the owner of the project comes in and wishes to expand or alter their use, does this new methodology say, well, we're going to put you through the new methodology, and what you're accustomed to gets thrown out the window? Or is there some hybrid? Because you can see there could very well be significant winners and losers depending on which we adopt or how we transition and what we leave behind. So I'm curious, has there been much discussion about that?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. The new methodology, once it's adopted, it becomes the law. So if someone is coming in with a new, let's say, housing unit, it'll be analyzed with the new policy in the general plan. If someone is coming in for an expansion on an existing project, we were going to be only looking at the delta of that. You know, we're not going to go back and open the books on something that is already in. And the nice thing about this is that we will still collect fees. We will still calculate the trips. And the traffic impact fees will be applied fairly with a robust capital investment program that the council will look at and know where we're putting in our money in terms of investment. So there's a critical point here. We only look at it from our point of view. A developer has an interest in knowing what their project is going to look like or what the traffic conditions is going to look like around their project to ensure that their project is a success. So that doesn't prevent us from going and using level of service to show how things work around the development. And it's always been a negotiation process as to who's responsible for improvements, how does the traffic impact fee kick in, and could we use some of the traffic impact fee, or could we give the developer a break if they engage in doing a mutually beneficial improvement around their project itself. So those are all questions, but what we're getting away with, or we're recommending that we get away with, is holding every project responsible to show that we have a level of service D, which is becoming more and more impossible, and enforcing our political bodies, whether it's the City Council or the Planning Commission, to make findings of overriding considerations. And we're just saying, we know it's enough, we can't do anything about it.
So, Rafael, let me just interrupt you.
Sure.
I get that. I mean, I sort of get it to the extent that I can understand it. I think I do. And I think it's terrific that well, maybe not terrific. I understand why we're going to have to transition. And I understand some of the benefits of VMT, the VMT model over the LOS model. I'm talking about the specific conditions that exist in our community now. And let me give you two examples.
Okay.
One is very close to me because it involves the area, and Paul knows it very well. The area where my office is located, out by the Home Depot. Mm-hmm. The office buildings out there were entitled based in part upon trip counts. And so the floor area that was approved for each of those buildings out there was modeled after trip counts. Trip counts and the level of service impacts those trip counts may generate may be very different from vehicle miles traveled.
Yes.
That is the analysis. So if someone in one of those office buildings comes to you after you adopt a new model and says, okay, forget the trip counts, I want to expand my floor area because if it's about vehicle miles traveled based upon national data that we just heard about, my VMT is lower. I should be able to expand my floor area. Do we allow that to happen? What if the reverse takes place? Someone thinks they're hurt by VMT and wants to benefit from the old regime of trip counts. They'll say, I should be grandfathered in. Use trip counts because I invested my money on that basis. That's what I'm trying to get at. So let's look at another example. We have a retailer, I'm not going to mention it by name, who's been proposed in the newspaper to come into the Northgate Mall. They're coming into a mall that once was a regional mall that increasingly has become more neighborhood serving. If they come in and they're now going to be a significant destination box, vehicle miles traveled is going to be very significant. Do we use the previous conditions of approval that got the Northgate Mall as it's presently populated, or do we apply a new methodology which would harm this proposed new big box at the Northgate Mall?
3 excellent questions, and I will address them. We're not abandoning trip counts. There's something called trip generation, which is you open up a manual about 3 volumes about this high. It lists every land use, and it shows what is the trip generation for that land use per employee, per 1,000 square feet, per all of that. So we are not stopping. We're not stopping the trip counting based on the trip generation, because in all reality, VMT or whatever metric we use, the box is generating that many trips in the immediate area, and that is a fact. So, and we're proposing to continue to use those trip generation as basis for the equitable monitoring. That means that it transfers into money, basically. We still count the trips. We still assess development projects based on the trips generated for the traffic impact fee calculation, and that keeps it fair. Now, for the state, because they require, SB 743 requires VMT, we will do the VMT calculations. And then we will still continue to do site-specific analysis, or just outside the site-specific analysis. We wouldn't go and count 54 intersections and analyze each and every intersection. So, and I think the answer applies to all of the 3 examples that you mentioned. We will still continue to use trip generation, and we'll still continue to assess projects based on the trips that they generate.
If I could add one quick thing specific to VMT. One issue that every agency is struggling with right now with respect to VMT is to whether to adopt the state recommended threshold, which is an average, you've probably heard 15% below the regional average as being the state OPR's recommended threshold, or to do something different than that, i.e. in the cases of many suburban communities who might not be able to meet that threshold because they don't have the level of transit or the level of active transportation facilities that the urban core, say in San Francisco or Oakland, might in the Bay Area. So that's what a lot of communities are struggling with, and I think that gets to maybe your question about, in some ways, about what could be expected. And we'll be coming back to talk to you about that. Do we want to use the 15% or something different? A lot of suburban communities are thinking about a lower threshold because that's more realistic. Because the issue is, if you get that development on the edge of town that has a higher VMT, it's going to have a tougher time mitigating it. The cost will be much higher. So that's something that we'll want to come back and talk to you about as to where you want to sit on that spectrum of the threshold of significance for VMT, because that does have a direct cost implication. And it's not a capital cost. In most cases for VMT, it's an ongoing cost of trying to increase your transit and bicycle and pedestrian use. And so that's like an ongoing, almost an O&M cost, if you will, that project would bear if you have a high threshold. Otherwise, you'd have to conclude it's significant, unavoidable, you get into the same issue. Anyway.
If I may add one comment to all of this, I think that your question was very good, primarily because someone comes in the future, let's just say they're proposing something that is more than what we've assumed in our general plan, and we're dealing with VMT, we will have to treat it no differently than, let's say, that same project we're generating more traffic and LOS impacts than we are assuming right now, where we have to do an EIR. So I think a lot of this goes hand in hand with what Bob was saying. It depends upon how we set up our local threshold and what we assume in our general plan. So it's real critical to know what projects we're going to expect in the future so that we can assume that in the assessment of VMT, just like we would do with a level of service. So I don't know if that helps answer your question, Council Member.
in part. I'll just, my quick comment, you want feedback, my comment is simplistic, which is I want to see whatever model we move towards, that it be as simple, as predictable, as cost-effective as possible, and yet reasonably protective of our city streets. And I'm not sure where any one of these options, where they reside within that, within those criteria.
The one thing that I hear, and maybe you can help me understand how this might relate. Certainly one thing that I hear is the congestion in downtown and how difficult it is now as compared to prior periods to maneuver. I'm curious as to whether or not this new indicator, the VMT indicator, is going to be able to answer the question that might have otherwise been fairly simple with regard to back to LOS. Well, it's D, or pick a letter, I don't care. Will we be able to express what the comparative level of congestion is using this model?
I don't think the model is going to solve the congestion. It's
Well, it won't
just a
solve
metric.
it, but will we be able to express in terms that people understand?
This is a tough one. I mean, I think that's why we're added the piece of travel time from A to B, because trying to walk up to someone and say the VMT is this versus that, what does that mean? Right. I mean, it's very hard to articulate what it means. Related to congestion and the whole direction of counting greenhouse gases and vehicle mile travels is to really encourage other modes of transportation. Right. So that will help the downtown. Building housing next to transit center, shorten the trips, and investing in multimodal projects and facilities that are to the scale where it encourages. When we look at the preliminary results from the general plan, the charrette for the specific plan or the precise plan downtown, we see that there's an effort to connect bicyclists to the transit. And this kind of investment is what's going to get us there, and that is a statement that was agreed on the state level, county level, and all levels of government.
Well, I agree with the intent. I'm just concerned about the indicator as to whether or not we'll be able to monitor, if you will, growth with this new measurement, and therefore I'm concerned we may not know what the outcome is with regard to the principal concern of many. I don't know if it's principal or not, but concern of many with regard to congestion and how we best deal with the congestion issue. The practical matter, that's what bugs people. They're driving around in one thing or another, and now they've got to deal with this, and is it sleight of hand as to whether or not we've changed the rules to make them a little more obscure, if you will.
There's that risk.
So somehow we've got to be able to equate what we currently experience so we can control it within that framework. And if this does it, fine. I mean, I agree with the concept. I like the concept. It's more complex, but I like it. But as long as it tells us the same and paints the same picture from which then we can judge that's okay or it's not okay, but at least we have a reference point.
Here's an explanation that might really register with the average person. When we do the level service analysis, we take a snapshot of a peak hour in the middle of the week, that is, and we take it as a reference point, and that could be off by 15 to 20% on a good day.
Right.
With technology, and as we move forward, and we can have monitors on the arterials, we can get travel time as an average over an hour or 2 hour a period. We could get much more accurate representation of how our arterials are functioning. instead of taking a snapshot. And that's another advantage of the delay index.
Yeah, but that's a methodology. I think you could attribute that to any method and come up with maybe more meaningful data. In and of itself, the change of EMT is not going to change the way in which we measure it. Or if we change the measurement, it makes it maybe a more accurate, reflective measure. Well, that's fine, but this doesn't. I don't think do that. If we change the methodology, then we change the methodology.
Yeah,
Anyway, what other comments? Nope. Going to public comments, please.
Good evening, Bill Carney, Sustainable San Rafael. Boy, I'm really looking forward to this white paper on VMTs. I think we're going to all get educated thoroughly, and I feel like tonight we're being kind of thrown into the middle of the process in a way without having that really basic fundamental background about what this is and why it is, why we're doing it. I think, the staff report has alluded to this a number of times, but the state is saying this will be a better way of judging the impacts on greenhouse gases, the impacts of all of the automobile travel that we do. And of course, one of the results of that is not only greenhouse gases, but a lot of traffic congestion. So, immediately we're in that discussion without really getting maybe the bigger picture. So I'm looking forward to that. I would just offer at this point also that, traffic management in and of itself is not going to solve these problems, or traffic counting in and of itself is not going to solve these issues. And I would submit, we need to look, as has been alluded to, at a more holistic view of what the impact of development is. So sure, the impact on car traffic, but what about the impact on transit? What about the opportunities for transit created by a particular development? What about the opportunities and impact on bicycles and on walking? If we're trying to create an environment where we've really got a diversity of mobility and overall an environment that is much more livable. So just a few thoughts as we get into this, and I'm looking forward to a really comprehensive discussion of it. Yeah, thank you.
And thank you. Anybody else? Oh.
Yeah, Frank Smart. This A to B, my question would be, using monitors, you have 1 million of them. How would you know where A was and where B was for any movement in space for a car? A dot. Where was the A? Where's the B? I don't get it. Where's the start? Where's the finish?
Okay. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Back for final comment. Any comment with regard to the reference point?
Yes, the A to B will be defined very precisely in the plan, and we would agree that we would measure 2nd Street from G to Heatherton, for example. That would be the A to B. That would be the metric that we will check. We could be doing Heatherton from Mission to 2nd. This is southbound movement. We can track that, and that is the A to B. So the 5 or 6 arterials that I've suggested would be defined, and it'll be representative of the travel in this town and the measure of congestion of this town. And we can increase those and set some criteria as to what we look at depending on the proximity of the development proposal to those arterials. So we wouldn't be checking everything all the time and going back to square one of doing what we're doing today.
Other comments? John? Okay.
I'll give some feedback. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Rafael. Sorry that it was like later hour. Otherwise we'd even be biting in even more. So just general feedback. I don't have any specific questions. I think the mayor and vice mayor asked some great ones. The goals are excellent. Totally agree with the goals that you stuck up there. So I think that was a good guiding document. In terms of the arterials, and I'm not going to pick which one seems best, you guys are the expert on that, but I do think in San Rafael, we know where our key congestion points are, and this is what the mayor was also getting at. We already know that, so knowing that, let's put our attention there. So that, to me, kind of leans towards arterials. We know what the problem areas are, so let's just focus our efforts on that. So I would want any hybrid, any option that you pick, to recognize that, as opposed to just saying, oh, this is what we should apply everywhere, not recognizing it's probably less than half a dozen really bad spots in San Rafael. So I would consider that. In terms of the trip monitoring, you had made a comment that it assumes the growth in San Rafael, right? So you're looking at the growth in that area in the trip monitoring option. Again, we know where potential growth is going to occur in San Rafael. We're a pretty built-out community, so which option looks at where's our potential growth and what makes the most sense. So the good news is here, I mean, A to B and all of this, I agree with you, it's a little hard to follow all of that, but we actually know our town, so let's use the information that we have with our town and our community to figure out the best approach. And then just in terms of the LOS, VMT, traffic monitoring, like so many other things, is evolving. So let's evolve. It's already come down from the state. I agree the LOS is something we're familiar with. If there's a way we can kind of use a A to F, designation as you outlined in Arterial, let's do that. But it's changing. I mean, the greenhouse gas emissions efforts that are coming out, we're not going to go backwards. We're not going to be going back there. So I think the sooner we start jumping, as painful as it might be, and it is going to be confusing for the community, for developers, I thought Andrew had excellent comments, like, yeah, how is all that going to work? But no matter where that start point is, it's going to occur and we're going to have to deal with it. And because we're working on the general plan right now, let's just, put it all in there, so.
Thank you. Andrew? Yep. You've probably heard enough from us, so if you have, and I would agree, I like the concept. I just want to make sure that the community is comfortable with the assessment process, so it's still in context with what we're familiar with. Because frankly, if you went out and asked 10 people what VMT was, you get blank stares from 9.5. So let's be careful about that, because you guys understand it, but we're also dealing with the community and those who wish to develop here and reside here and travel here and all the other things. So let's not be sleight of hand with regard to incorporating this for everybody's benefit, I would suggest. With that, I think we're somewhat exhausted on this point, but ready to receive your next report to become more informed. So thanks for helping us so far.
Thank you.
And let's see, I think we're just accepting the report. Yeah.
I move that we
Motion.
accept the report.
Is there a second?
Second.
Move to second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Collin.
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Aye.
Vice Mayor McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, matter carries 4-0. Thanks once again, and we'll now turn to 3rd Street rehabilitation as the final item for the evening. No pressure.
Doing it for you. She's doing it for you.
We have a solid 45 minutes for you now.
No doubt. Yeah.
Is she going to be able to control the PowerPoint?
Yeah, I think so. Well, we'll do it if she can. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and the rest of the council.
Do
Bill
reverence.
Guerin with Public Works. With me is Lauren Davini, traffic engineer in Public Works. We also have Jason Kirchman and April Malvino Miller from BKF, who have helped us with the development of the concept you're going to see tonight. It kind of goes right along with Councilmember Collins' comment that we don't want to focus on the streets that really need the attention in San Rafael, and 3rd Street is certainly one of them. So what we're going to do tonight is present you with some of the ideas that we've taken, had BKF study, taken public to some community meetings and other things, and then hopefully get your feedback on whether we're going in the right direction or not with the 3rd Street rehabilitation study. It's unfortunate that $12 million doesn't get you as far as it once did. We have some really good ideas that are probably not affordable in this plan, but we'll go through a couple of those also. We also know that you all received significant feedback from a number of the community today and over the weekend about making sure that there's a bike path through San Rafael, sort of on the west end that gets you to First Street. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well, the challenges that are facing us trying to put that in place, because it's quite an expensive proposition to get a full bike path through there, but we do have some ideas that at least get close to a full bike path, so we'll talk about those as well. But I'm going to start by introducing Lauren, who's going to walk through the presentation, and then Lauren's going to introduce the presentation, April's going to do most of the talking, and then we'll take any questions and comments you might have.
And thanks for doing so.
Thank you, Bill. Good evening, Mayor and council members. So just a little background on 3rd Street. It's a major arterial between US 101 and the communities in West Marin. It's 1.3 miles. Our study segment is 1.3 miles long. There are 14 signalized intersections. It's an important part of safe routes to school for folks going from Sun Valley to Davidson and Laurel Dell, and from Gersel Park up to Sun Valley. And it's surrounded by a number of different uses, including residential, commercial, and our downtown. In 2004, TAM established a Measure A expenditure plan, and this opened up funds for major roadway and infrastructure projects throughout Marin. These projects are prioritized based on the roadway condition, traffic volumes, transit frequency, and bike and pedestrian access. And back in 2009, San Rafael project, the West End Revitalization Project, was completed. In 2016, Measure A provided $11 million, and then the State Local Partnership Program provided another $1.5 million for the 3rd Street Rehab Project. There's quite a few things going on 3rd Street. So we have a few different funding sources. The Highway Safety Improvement Program is funding intersection improvements from about Luton Street down to Grand. And we have funding from 2 different cycles. Then there's the Innovative Deployment of Enhanced Arterials, the IDEA grant, and that gives us money for detection and signal performance measures, which we can then use to monitor the segment and try to make improvements to getting people through. MMWD has a big pipeline project they need to do, and then some privately funded developments like BioMarin, the Seagate Apartments, our transit center, which is moving, as well as the spot where the transit center was. And these funding sources, they go from local, regional, state, federal, and they all have different funding requirements. So there's just a lot to keep track of as far as administrating the projects from the staff end. But tonight's objective is we are asking for City Council input on the feasibility study, and April Miller from BKF will be presenting that.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you, council members. Oh, she switched it. So tonight I'm going to go over a brief overview of the process we went through, as well as some of the key items and kind of interesting aspects of the project. Here's a brief timeline of the last year and a half with our community outreach and different meetings we've had with the public. As part of our public outreach, we formed 2 working groups, one on the technical side and one with community stakeholders. So these are a few of the people who were invited to those meetings. We used these working groups as feedback, and we would do a dry run of our community meeting presentations with them prior to meeting with the public. We had 2 community meetings for this project. The first meeting that we had went over the existing conditions of what's out there on 3rd Street. And we also provided a lot of boards where the public could look at different streetscape options and vote kind of on what they wanted to see out on 3rd Street. For our second community meeting, we took the feedback that we got and we created a conceptual plan where we presented and then we showed kind of the layout of what we could afford on 3rd Street. This is one of the examples of the boards from our first community meeting that went over the different streetscape items. As you can see, providing street trees, widened sidewalks, and doing curb extensions or bulb outs were some of the priorities that the community had. Oh, that works too. So a little bit of what we heard based on our community outreach that we did. Bike and pedestrian access and safety is definitely a priority on this corridor, as well as looking at the vehicle congestions near 101 and kind of how traffic kind of speeds up as it goes west. There's definitely there's a need for tree canopy and kind of a level of comfort as you're walking down 3rd Street. And with that, enhancing accessibility and the sidewalks themselves. The community wanted to provide a bicycle access from Miracle Mile to Miramar, which Bill also mentioned. And also kind of simplifying the 4th Street intersection for all users. The residents wanted us to maintain parking, specifically by Shaver Street, and also improve the safety in that area. And always we want to keep in mind the safe access to schools and safety for pedestrians, and also generally improving the wayfinding signage in downtown. So with all of this, we created a conceptual plan which was provided with your staff report. And we kept in mind for the project that we presented was mostly just taking into account the $12.5 million provided by TAM to make sure that we could keep what we were proposing in the report within that budget. And as Bill mentioned, there's a few additional projects that we looked at that with additional funding we could afford. So some of the corridor-wide improvements that are out there that will implement at different intersections are bulb outs. Bulb outs are used to reduce the pedestrian crossing distance. High visibility crosswalks. We're going to do some traffic signal upgrades, as well as installing conduits for future fiber network. Providing additional street trees, pavement rehabilitation, upgrading the accessibility and curb ramps, as well as paying attention to those key routes to schools and pedestrian safety. So here's one of the examples of some of these corridor-wide improvements that we would implement. Here, this is for A Street and B Street. For reference, the Kaiser building is on A Street. So here we're showing installing bulb outs with the high visibility crosswalks. And then we will also be doing the signal upgrades and the safety street lighting at the intersections. As you move west down 3rd Street, you go up a hill and then down a hill, and you end up going around a curve at Shaver Street here. In this area, the existing lane widths are very wide. So we were trying to look at different options to improve pedestrian access and safety. So here we've actually are showing uniform lane widths throughout the entire corridor. So we're narrowing the lanes down to 11 or 12 feet to provide additional width for pedestrians and also to providing a parking buffer for people who are getting in and out of their cars through here. And this is the area where the residents really want to make sure we kept their on-street parking. As an example of the space reallocation, here the top is the existing and then the proposed. So as you see, we're shifting the lanes over to provide 11 to 12 foot lanes so that we can fit the widened sidewalk and kind of a buffered area for vehicles and parked cars. So as you move west, this is the section where 3rd Street meets 2nd Street, so now it's 2 directions. So this is between Miramar to East Street. We received a lot of community input, especially on our 2nd community meeting, and we had a project-specific email address where I received about 12 emails from the public expressing the desire to have some sort of bike facility between Miramar and West End. So in this location, which is also a safer route to school from G Street to Miramar, we're providing an 8 to 10 foot widened sidewalk on the south side there. And in addition, you'll see that there's some of the corridor-wide improvements at G Street with the bulb outs and the signal modifications. Here's a cross-section of this area. So you can see that we are narrowing the lanes to about 12 feet so that we can, and removing the median so that we can provide this 8 to 10 foot sidewalk. This is the area where in the future, if the city would like to, they could always look into building a retaining wall and pushing into the hillside to provide an even wider path, or looking at undergrounding the overhead utility poles. On the next section, as you go to the west, this is between East Street to Miracle Mile. For reference, at East Street, across the street is the Jack in the Box. So the first, we're trying to figure out how to fit in a bicycle facility through here. So our first option we're looking at is removing parking in this area, so that we can provide two-way bike lane with a 2-foot buffer. In this case, in this example, we're also removing the left turn pocket into Jack in the Box, so we can provide a pedestrian refuge area, because it's a long crossing for pedestrians to cross at the East Street location. The second option that we have is actually shifting all the lanes up to the north and removing the median, so that we can try to maintain as much parking as we can. It still maintains about 7 of the 9 parking stalls here, and this will also provide the two-way bicycle traffic between West End and East Street. And also, just to note, it also removes the left turn pocket into the Jack in the Box and the left turn pocket onto West Street, so traffic would be diverted to the two other streets. Going back to some of what we heard in our project goals, I mean, the importance of the safety and access for pedestrians and bikes is one of our top priorities. And also, we want to make sure that we provide an economically viable project for you. I'm going to put it over to staff.
Thank you.
That we did look at and is quite unaffordable, unfortunately. The 4th Street, 3rd Street, Miracle Mile intersection is really complex for bicyclists and pedestrians to cross. There's several sort of stops along the way when you go from the Greenfield sort of bike path that exists today to trying to cross over to 4th Street and then on to potentially 5th Street or wherever the bike path may end up. And we looked at a couple of options to accomplish an improvement there. This is the existing condition, so the cars can kind of come around the corner and get straight onto Miracle Mile. What we looked at is bringing 4th Street into a T intersection at Miracle Mile. That would clean up the pedestrian movements quite a bit. Traffic would come to a stop at 4th Street. When the light changes, they'd be able to turn right towards Miracle Mile or left towards 2nd Street. And this really improves the intersection for bicyclists, pedestrians, and others using it. Unfortunately, it's a $3 million plus improvement, so it's not something that we can actually afford, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention in case you find some extra money somewhere. We have ways to spend it. The bike path is the other thing that is the variable. If we do the retaining wall and do the full bike path, that's a significant, more than $1 million improvement to this. And we just can't simply get it into the project within the other, basic improvements that we want to make on this, 1.5 mile long corridor. We're focused on sort of Lindaro west. We aren't affecting the area directly near the transit center right now. And to Grand Avenue, which is the stretch of the project. We would do the environmental analysis for the entire stretch, but we're focusing our dollars on sort of that Lindaro west area, while we wait to see what happens with the transit center, what happens with Seagate, what happens with the future transit center and the impacts that they may have in San Rafael. So that is our presentation, and we are looking for feedback from you. Just quickly to go through next steps, we would incorporate any council feedback we get tonight. We would look to issue a request for proposals for the environmental work and the design work coming up. We expect that to take as much as 18 months to 2 years to go through the entire environmental process and design process. And so in spring or summer in 2021, we would be issuing an RFP for construction and moving into construction at that time.
I'm curious, since this is driven certainly in part, maybe large part, by the funding that's available, roughly the $12 million, where the $12 million came from. I don't mean physically came from, but why 12? What was there any concept with regard to 12, or is this a number out of the hat, or why 12?
The major roads in Measure A had a significant funding component, and it has been spent down over several years. As Lauren talked about, The West End got a significant chunk of that money early on. Mill Valley, Miller Avenue was more recently, they just opened their remodeled Miller Avenue using the major roads component of Measure A. And our intention is to spend all the money that's left, and that happens to be $11 million, and there's other funding sources that we're using as well. So TAM has a certain amount of money from Measure A for major roads. As you know, Mayor, that's now changing, and they're repositioning their funding with their new bond measure. But the money that they have left over for major roads is $11 million, and we intend to spend all of it.
So Mayor, I would just add to that really quickly that Bill's absolutely right. And the major road allocations, though, were also geographical. So there's kind of central Marin, southern Marin, there's a number of different geographical areas that TAM divides it up into. Right. And then it's also prioritized by the TAM board. So as Bill said, we did the 4th Street project in the West End, and then the next one after that is this. So if there were sufficient funds or additional funds after this project, it would move down to the project that TAM ranked after that. What we're seeing is that there's not enough funds to do everything we want to do with this project, so that's why it's limited.
Yeah, I'm somewhat, being on the TAM board, somewhat familiar with that, but I always find it interesting how various parties and various projects come up with amounts. And I hope that 12 is going to do what we have planned. I guess I'm thinking of our infamous bike path at $8 million. Seems pretty minor compared to this. So I don't know. In any case, John, you have
Yeah, so tagging on to that last comment there. So what's our contingency plan? As you mentioned in the last slide there, that RFP for construction would be 18 to 24 months from now, and what we've seen in the previous projects that we've put out, even over a shorter period of time from initial estimates to actually going out to bid and construction, costs have significantly increased, and we've had to pare down the original project and to seek more funds. So in terms of priority, if you're budgeting out this $12 million as the project is presented today, where is the priority 2 years from now? Or is the task to obtain more funding to do the whole thing? Because I can't imagine that where we stand today and estimating this $12 million cost is going to be the same as it is 2 years when we're ready to go for construction. So are we looking at a half project 2 years from now? And where is that half going to be cut?
Thank you for both of those comments.
And we can tell.
That's why we're looking for council feedback. Obviously, we're focused on pedestrian safety and throughput on the roadway, so those would be our major focuses as we go forward with this project. We're not in design yet. The BKF has done a lot of estimating associated with the project as it is, but we don't know exactly what it's going to cost. So we will be looking to prioritize. We will be looking to have a contingency in the project as we design it. Again, focused on improving the signals, improving pedestrian safety in the terms of bulb outs and things like that. We obviously have to do the ADA ramps anyway, so doing bulb outs is in addition to that other work that's going to have to happen. We do want to resurface the street. We're going to get some money from MMWD because they're going to have to tear up the street to replace their pipe. So there's other funds coming into the project. I think we talked about a few different things, the Buyer Marin and what they might do in front of their property, Seagate, what it might do in front of its property, and how we might be able to tag onto those things. The IDEA grant provides some additional funds for us. The HSIP grant that we just recently received provided signal upgrade funding for several intersections. So those are all kind of in addition to the $11 million that we have. And they're not insignificant amounts of money either. So we're going to try to bring all those things together and make the improvements that we want to make. But we're very much focused on safety and throughput as a starting point for the program.
What are the terms on those grants in terms of we've received them, but when do we have to spend them?
That is a good question. The major roads money is available until spent.
Right.
The IDEA grant, do you remember those?
The end of the year?
What? So we would be doing those improvements early on, and then HSIP grant, I think, is a couple years, if I'm not mistaken, 3 years. So those various funding sources have different timeframes.
And are those renewable, or do we have to reapply, and is it backed up to competitive type of request from the people that are granting those funds to us? My concern is just with time, if we're not ready to go when those funds are needed to be spent, do we lose those funds and then thus lose that opportunity to use those?
It's a good question. I don't know if they're renewable, but our intention is to spend the money before the grants get expired. So we would be making improvements, not necessarily with one large project, but in several different phases if we need to in order to spend the funds.
And on the MMWD project, do they have a timing on that? I'm just looking in terms of if they're doing a major pipeline replacement, are we waiting for them to do their replacement before we start to do road resurfacing, or it just doesn't? It would make sense to wait. And have they given us a timeline that they're?
We've notified them that we're doing this improvement, and they've asked us to go in and do their pipe prior to us doing the work. So they have our timeline, they're aware of it, and they're planning to get their work done within that timeline.
Okay. That's what I have for now.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Kate? Yep, couple questions. I'm not sure if it's for who it's for. This was, the feasibility study was great, how you had the existing conditions and then the pictures of what could be changed or what is being proposed. So I had a question on the access point to Walgreens, Lindaro. Was it considered to remove that driveway access off of Third? Does that get us anything? Because that's a very strange intersection,
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello again. There is a project in the work, and going to Councilman Gamblin's point about the timing and the limitation on how and when we spend the money. We have that laid out in the eastern portion of 3rd Street, because that's where we had the high safety elimination grant. And the Walgreen driveway is a city property, and in one of the options we showed that the Walgreen driveway will go away. That will simplify the intersection greatly, and it goes towards the goal of improving pedestrian safety as well.
Right. Okay, so it is possibly something that
It
could be
is. It
considered.
is in the works, yes.
'Cause it seemed like that for all the reasons that you just mentioned. And then over on B Street and 3rd, we have, and I don't think that, I'm not sure if that's, I don't know what development property that is. I don't think it's the Seagate one. I think Seagate's in a different location. But the B and 3rd, so how, are we looking at how these projects, it sounds like the answer is yes, interfaces with future projects? So this is the area that's across from St. Vincent's. So that hasn't approved, but.
Yeah, we're looking to take advantage of the requirements of the development so that they invest in the street at the same time as they do their.
So when they're coming forward to be like,
Right,
this is what we've been planning on.
Yeah.
And then the last question, I know you'd said in your presentation that the road widths were being changed to 11 feet near East Street. So when you kind of up and over that hump, right? So you're making the road narrower. So there's the parking buffer and everything else. And yet over near East Street, where we're trying to get the bike lane as much room as possible, the proposal was for 12 feet for those lanes. Can't we how come those can't be 11 feet? Always trying to sneak some more feet.
Yeah, we'll have to look at those details a little closer when we have a survey on what the lane widths are. But typically, with having buses and trucks in the lane closest to the curb, we prefer to have a 12 or 12.5-foot lane.
Okay.
But when there's a buffer, cars aren't driving in the gutter, so we usually go down to 11 feet there. So that's why it's bigger.
And do they find that people drive slower when it's 11 feet, when the lanes are narrower?
When there's consistent lane widths, people drive a consistent speed. It's
okay.
usually when it goes from 11 to 15 to, that's where you see the
Yes.
regular speeds.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. We've received a number of emails, other communication from our bike friends. And yet it doesn't seem like we're able to do much with it. 11 or 12, I thought it was 12, but whatever the number is. And I'm thinking of the bike path from downtown to Anderson, and the argument was valid, I believe, that it's going to be it'll be less expensive to do it now, and so we're pushing pretty hard and almost have it through that section. Does the same apply here? I mean, I'm stuck on the 12 and whether or not we should somehow, through magic, I suppose, come up with some additional funding to do a better job with regard to bike paths throughout this area. Is there anything we can do?
There is, obviously, we can do more. I think if you award a major construction project like this, there's probably is the opportunity to get a economy of scale associated with building the retaining wall at the same time. It's something that if the council believes is an important thing to develop as part of the design work, we can develop that, bring it back to you, talk about the cost of it and what the trade-offs might be, and we can make a collective decision about whether that's an important part of this project or if we should try to identify other sources of funds to make that happen.
I'd be interested in doing that simply because we're at a point where it might be most opportune. If it's not possible, it's not possible, but I don't necessarily want to give up on that possibility at this point in time. So if you could give that some thought, and we were the optimist, I suppose, maybe we can beat the bushes and come up with some additional funding. It makes sense to me to do it while we're doing everything else at this point in time, if at all possible. So I'd be interested in that.
Just real quick, the appendices were not attached to the project study report and the staff report. Not throwing stones at anyone, but there was one that I was particularly interested in reading. What's that? Oh, the links were there.
I said the same thing, and they're actually not at the end, but they were in some other place.
Got
Just
it.
to
My apologies. My apologies. But due to my own carelessness, I didn't review the traffic analysis because I didn't see it. So does the traffic analysis, does it indicate that, you said one of the prime goals is traffic flow. Does it assure that we're going to see either similar or improved traffic flow as a result of these improvements, in addition to all of the other benefits that we're hoping for?
Jason Kirschman, BKF. So to answer that question, it's one of the big things we heard was really controlling the flow of traffic as it goes through the corridor, because you're kind of congested as you in downtown, and then people really speed up as you head west. And so some of the reallocation of space, as April mentioned, really kind of meters that flow and makes it more consistent and safety. So that was really where the study focused on, was making sure that we could have consistent traffic flow through there as opposed to necessarily capacity studies, since we're somewhat limited with what we've got.
So consistent flow means what? What is inconsistent flow?
So inconsistent flow would be the quick start to stops that you see. You just need to take a quick walk down the street. You see people are driving sometimes 45 miles an hour as you start getting out of town and into the Miracle Mile. So it's really using elements like consistent lane widths, some of the landscaping things to keep people basically within the limits of what the road's supposed to be. So at or near the speed limits, moving at a consistent speed, things of those things.
So I like that, but at the end of the day, to use the metaphor earlier, the A to B travel time, is it going to be improved, the same, or worse?
So with what we've got now, we would expect it to be about the same. But that exact study hasn't been fully through because the project itself has got a couple of different components that would impact that.
Right. And then, I didn't understand, if you explained it, but I didn't understand. Why is the left turn, the pocket lane that turns left into Jack in the Box, why is that being proposed for elimination? What do we gain by eliminating it?
So that's primarily for area of refuge for pedestrian crossing there. There's really no space in between. It's a pretty long crossing. So the primary goal was pedestrian safety.
So then if we were given the option, we could eliminate the median altogether, then what happens to the area of refuge?
There's an impact there, yeah. So that the downside to not taking the parking and doing this is that you don't get that area of refuge. So that's why one of the reasons we had a couple options at this intersection.
I see. Thanks.
Any other comments? Where are we at here? Public comments? Evening.
Hi. Good evening, everybody. My name is Deborah Duenas, and I am a bicycle commuter.
I work at the Marin County Health and Wellness Campus, and I live in Fairfax. And I just have to say that riding on 2nd Street from West End, so if I'm going east, going from West End to Miramar, where you can cut off and get to 1st Street, it's a nightmare. It's really scary. And once a man in a truck rolled down his window and yelled at me, he said, "I'm not trying to be mean, but you shouldn't be riding your bicycle here." And I just said, like, there's no other way. I'm trying to get to Anderson. There's no other way to go. And it's really dangerous, and I really hope that you can find a way to have a separated bicycle path that goes both east and west, because coming home is another nightmare. You know, you either have to go way out of your way to go up to 4th Street, or take your chances on 3rd Street, which is really scary, or ride on the sidewalk, which is what I usually do because I want to be safe. But then you've got to watch out for all the driveways, because cars don't expect a bicycle to be on the sidewalk. So basically, I mean, please do something about that. It needs to happen. It's just a short piece of the commute going east and west, connecting West Marin to, you know, like to the Health and Wellness Campus. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Mohammed Khalifa. I am a homeowner, landlord on that 3rd Street corridor, and I want to thank April and Jason for their thoughtfulness for planning this out with the 3rd Street project. They really involved the community, and I want to publicly thank them. On that ramp from East Street going down into 3rd is where my homes are. I have seen countless people get hit. As a matter of fact, there was an accident, a pedestrian versus vehicle accident that happened 2 months ago because of the unsafetiness there on Shaver. Also, every morning as I get ready to go to work, I see a group of kids riding their bike to go to Davidson. And they're really cute. They're a group of boys and a group of girls, and they have their own little pack. It just pains me to think that if we don't have the bulb outs and we don't have the traffic signals thoughtfully planned out, that we would put those young kids in jeopardy. So I just urge you to accept this project, and thank you very much.
And thanks for your comments.
Good evening, Bjorn Griepenberg with Marin County Bicycle Coalition. If it's okay, I have a clarifying question. In the presentation, April, you said that it was two-way bike access from East Street.
Let's do this. Why don't you present the question?
Okay,
And
I'll
if there are
present it.
others
Well, it
that
kind of
surface, we'll answer, have someone answer each.
Sounds good. Yeah, it sort of dictates where my comments go, but I just wanted clarification on whether or not there was actually two-way bike access proposed from East Street to Miramar, because my impression from the staff report was that it wasn't.
If you could, or somebody, Bill, I don't know.
Yeah, there is a tight two-way bike path. It's not ideal, certainly, and it's I think it's 9 feet, as I recall, 8 to 9 feet. So it's yeah, so it's not ideal, certainly.
Okay.
Okay. Does that help?
Yes, that does.
Okay.
Thank you. In that case, I just again I'll go back a step and just say thanks to staff and the project team for all of your work on this, and especially for your attention to this area. As you know, it's important for a lot of folks, and it is the only gap between Fairfax and Santa Fe where if you're on a bike, you don't have a side street to get off onto. It's also a personal project, a priority for me. I bike between Santa Fe Smart Station and our office in Fairfax every day, and the only section on my 4-mile commute that leaves me even as a confident cyclist feeling scared, frustrated, angry is through downtown Santa Fe. This is the only place where we really don't have a good east-west bike connection. It's not just for people like me, though. We want biking to be safe, convenient, and inviting for people of all ages and abilities. In order to achieve that, we're really looking to this project to provide complete separation and protection from vehicular traffic, and we're looking for two-way bike access. If you've been able to make that work in this stretch, that's great. I also just want to call out the opportunity to narrow the travel lanes, as was discussed in the staff report. Best practices now basically say that any width over 11 feet is basically wasted space. So I do think that needs to be looked at closely. You know, on the Golden Gate Bridge, the wide lanes are 11 feet, and the other lanes are 9 feet. So encourage you to look at that closely. Thank you.
Can I ask you one question before you? We hear a lot from the bike folks, and glad to receive input. We're short of money, and my question is whether or not you can help us raise some money to address the issues you've suggested need to be added.
You know, we're always involved in, you know, my staff time working for a nonprofit organization is spent looking at funding sources. We were helpful on Second to Anderson in identifying grants for the city to pursue, including the urban greening grant, which was successful. That brought in about $2 million. And you know, cyclists aren't just cyclists. They also drive. You know, they spend money. They buy groceries. They own property. They pay income tax. They pay all the same taxes that we all do.
Yeah, we get that.
We're paying into this,
but
and
we're still
invested.
short. And it would be good if you could step up and help close that gap some. Yeah, that'd be good. I've heard that before, quite frankly.
I'm going to take the short microphone.
Sure, that's fine.
Hi, I'm Wendy Callens, Programs Coordinator for Safe Routes to Schools. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I want to appreciate the staff for inviting us to be part of their community outreach. I also want to express appreciation for staff for coming to our task force meetings and working with us on this project. So it's unfortunately surprising that we are not actually going to get the most important project for us, which is filling that gap between West End and Miramar, and also that crossing on 4th Street, because those are the most important Safe Routes to Schools programs that we need. And so, you know, it's nice to have a buffered bike lane, but unfortunately, unless you have a protected bike lane, we're not going to get a whole lot of parents who are going to let their kids bike along that area. We do appreciate the refuge at the G Street crossing. That is an important connection for the way the kids are going now. But the most important thing is to get that multi-use bike path along that stretch of road. As you're going to hear again and again, that is the most important project for us. And as far as where could funding come from, ATP is going to have a call for projects. There's going to be both state and regional opportunities. So I would recommend looking to that money, that you can get some major funding that way. TAM's about to issue a call for projects. Of course, we already have our eyes on that for a number of other projects. So, you know, funding is tight, and this is a complicated project with utility poles and the retaining wall. So I appreciate the dilemma that you're in, but I also would like you to appreciate that you said that Safe Routes to Schools was one of the important goals of this project, and you're not meeting that goal. So thank you.
Thanks for your comment. This one might be, yes, the camera can adjust, right? Am I right about that? Okay.
So, good evening. My name's Tamara Rich. Thank you to Mayor and Council and everyone from Public Works. I am a resident of 3 Welch Street, Ingersoll Park, and I have 2 children. We try to commute to Sun Valley Elementary, and in trying to work with Safe Routes and finding an optimal route, we have kind of come to this impasse at Second. I think it's pretty clear that Second needs work, but children are very iffy on their bikes, and you know, we have currently a recommended route to go on Second, and I've already gotten feedback from several parents saying they don't like it. These are just the Sun Valley folks. There's the whole team of families who live in West End who just don't feel safe at all sending their kids to Davidson via that route. So just looking at it from a child's perspective, a a really better sizable buffer with the two-way traffic and a lot of maybe a more improved look at that stretch looked at now. And I appreciate what you have said, Mayor Phillips, about trying to do it right this time around, coming up with the funding, trying to troubleshoot that. Maybe we're not going to solve that tonight, but ideally in the next, by entertaining the idea that we could still try to move forward, we can try to attain those goals of let's do it right the first time. Let's not agree to something that is only half when we know what really needs to be done is a retaining wall and a better path. So I think that's probably all I need to say. So thank you very much.
And thank you.
Hello, I'm Jim Waite. I'm a parent and a person that works in Santa Fe. I work at Grand Landing and I live in Sun Valley, so I drive this corridor on 3rd Street 2 to 4 times a day. 2nd Street also in Mission and the other routes that we may take depending on time of day. Things I think you don't want to forget about is some of the simpler things you could do. For instance, signage might be a good idea on 3rd Street on the freeway, so that people that are driving on 3rd Street have a general idea of what lane they need to be in to get on the freeway. I see a lot of out-of-state drivers, et cetera. They have no idea what lane they're in, so they're going to cut off. The other part is enforcement for all the people that don't want to wait in line, that cut in the last second. That could be taken care of by rigorous enforcement. Somebody mentioned Ladero Street. I mean, if you're going to keep the driveway open, you ought to make that at least a one-way, in either direction, one-way parking lot. You know, it's chaos. I go in there once in a while, and people go in different directions. It's not safe. In the morning, all the Davidson parents are cutting through that parking lot so that they can go down Ladero. So, you know, perhaps somebody could look at that. That's pretty much all I have. I have a lot of ideas because I drive this so often, but it's a pretty dangerous corridor. The thing that you shouldn't forget about is what I consider one of the more dangerous pedestrian intersections in the city of Santa Fe would be Grand and 3rd. I'm there every day, and I see a lot of close calls, a lot of them. It's very dangerous for crossing in different directions for pedestrians. And if I do it, I'm on a swivel because you can't really rely on drivers to yield to you. Thank you.
And thanks for your input.
Bill Carney, Sustainable San Rafael. Just a couple of quick comments. I would certainly support the getting in a, if you will, multi-use path in that stretch from Miramar to Miracle Mile. A question I had, and therefore getting it up to at least 12 feet or so seems to be our multi-use path kind of standard these days. The question I had was the stretch between, I guess it's East and Miracle Mile, where you had the 2 options, and option B looks preferable, but I'm curious why not combine the bike path that's in the street and the sidewalk as is done between East Street and Miramar. Why aren't those kind of the same treatment, at least as a start? And then if we can get more money to make it wider, that's great, but at least you have that as a beginning. So that's a suggestion, I guess. And then the second thing I want to say was planting strips. You know, street trees are great. I'm glad there are as many as there are, and more is always better. But connecting the tree wells with planting strips along the curb, right, is much healthier for the trees. So you have much better trees and begin to establish that kind of boulevard concept, which has been in the plan for downtown for 20 years or so. So that, and it also creates a much more comfortable zone for people using the sidewalk for pedestrians, because they get a little more separation with a low planting strip, you know, low ground cover or low shrubs there. So if you could, in your design detailing, take a look at that as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Good evening. Jean Severinghouse. I'm on the Safe Routes Task Force for Santa Fe and also have served in my own role as a Caltrans Bicycle Advisory Committee member on the entire process of the Santa Fe BPAC plan. And I looked it up today to be sure, and the BPAC plan from 2018 actually puts as one of the 3 top priority projects for this area of Santa Fe either a Class 1 or a Class 4, meaning a protected bike lane from Miramar to West End. So this is not like a sort of a second thought project. This is one of the top priorities. So I really support Mayor Phillips' request to find other funding and actually do this at the same time. It's critical. Second question is, I noticed on Senate Bill 1, I don't hear the city talking much about other uses for Senate Bill 1, but it looks like there's a local matching funds segment that is different from the, there's a dedicated section, I forget what the word is, but, and I'm no expert on SB1, but it looks to me like there should be money available for matching. And the third thing is that I would support what Bill was saying, that why don't we move the parked cars out and put the bikes and the pedestrians inside of them if we're going to retain parking between East and West and the West End, so that the cars are the buffer. So it's a kind of a new idea. The BPAC hasn't really looked at that new idea. I'm glad to hear that it's possible to do a 2-way. It just needs a little more money, but really encourage us to do that. Thank you.
And thank you.
Yeah, Frank Smart. I'm not really clear on the sidewalk. It's 8 to 10 feet, and that's not multiple use. That's for just pedestrians. We all travel that street all the time. I can go down that thing all day long, and if I see 10 people on the sidewalk, I'm lucky. So has anyone done a study on how many pedestrians really use the sidewalk in key segments on that 1.3 miles? Because there's a lot of space available to maybe make the more reasonable sidewalk for the number of people that are going to use it, and then open it up for bikes. Or then take the same concept on the lanes for the traffic, like that other gentleman said, 9 foot, 10 foot, and maybe find a little space here and there. But I don't see any numbers for usage of sidewalk, and I don't think it's really used that much. That's it.
Thank you. Lori.
Hi there, Lori Schifrin. I don't even know where to start. I thought this had to do with the 3rd Street rehabilitation. I noticed from the documents that these people, whose name I don't even never heard of before, I pay pretty close attention to what's going on the streets so that I can get around. I know that bulb outs cut down on traffic flow. They might help pedestrians, but I don't usually see pedestrians where the bulb outs are, especially coming down Heatherton. I only really see them on the 4th Street area. But they're there. I mean, so there's nothing you're going to do about that. Putting more bulb outs in, I don't think helps traffic move. The other thing is that when you listed all the people, I never knew about these public meetings, and I pay attention to this stuff. And when I looked at the list of who's part of this group, you've got the bicycle committee, but you don't have any public. You've got only companies. So I don't think the public was involved. You'll notice every comment so far that's come up before the last 2 have only been about bicycles. There's more than people who ride bicycles trying to get through Santa Fe. So that's, I guess, the most important thing. And the reason that you've gotten all the emails from only bicycle people, because you said you've been getting a lot of them from bicycle people, I don't think anybody knows about this. Other than yesterday's IJ, which I don't know how many people read that. That was my first clue. So, thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else? Seeing no one, close and come back. We have a report, excuse me. Report before us to adopt or suggest further modification. Any questions, comments, a motion would be appropriate then.
We accept the report.
Is there,
So
did you have a comment, Jim?
no, I just want to be clear what we're accepting and what direction that staff, if anything, is asking from us, if anything at all.
Glad you asked. Let's have clarification on that.
No, I think we got good feedback from the council and the public tonight, and we will use that information to develop our RFP for design, and we'll ask the designers to study these things as they move this project forward. This is, again, BKF's effort with us to do a conceptual evaluation of what's possible with the corridor, with the funds available. That was all with the intention of informing a future design project, and that's our next step. So we appreciate the feedback that we received.
So obviously, a lot of the feedback for the folks that spoke and the folks that, even with Lori talking about the outreach, I guess a question would be, aside from the businesses, the BPAC and others, what kind of outreach was there to non-bicycle travelers or non-business to get involved in this question?
We did advertise the project early on. I mean, it's been in process for a year and a half, so it's been some time since we did the community feedback initial effort for this project, but we did reach out to the community, generally speaking. The bicycle community is obviously well aware of this project. They track what TAM is spending money on. They track the fact that we have this funding, and obviously we brought this to Safe Routes to School, the BPAC, other of the engaged community members that are with us. I'm actually surprised that Lori is not aware of it, because she is very engaged in our community and is often a significant participant in our efforts. So that is a slip up on our part, but we did advertise this to the broader community and got feedback from them as well.
And then the last piece is it's obviously important for a lot of folks here to get as much out of this as we possibly can at the time, to the mayor's point, doing it when streets are getting torn up is the best time to do everything. So my only suggestion would be, because this is going to be something that's going to take place over the next 18 months to probably 3 to 4 years before it's finally finished. I mean, the Miller Avenue project took from start to finish about, what, 7 years? Yeah. I don't know that this would be that case as well, but as the project costs continue to increase from the time of concept where we are now to the time of construction and development, I would say that if we're going to put forth something to plan on this, that we try and figure out some sort of way to pay for this and not be going down a route, for lack of a better term, to fix what we need to fix and then not have any funding for what it seems like the community is, a good portion of the community is asking in terms of safe routes to schools and the biking. So while we directed them to look at the existing funding and what we could do with that, in your staff report there was, I guess, the $5 million in that red bucket up on the top of there of unfunded projects. Did that take into consideration all of the requests that we've received today in terms of retaining wall, dedicated multi-use plan? Are all those things in that $5 million, and is that a good guesstimate, or
I'll stake my life on. The $5 million does include the additional things that we did talk about. BKF is also responsible for the multi-use path project,
I wouldn't give that. That's not one of those things.
That was a mean thing to say, but that project grew for a bunch of different reasons that we've discussed at many times. It's a conceptual estimate. We'll continue to refine the number as we go forward. And I totally agree. We want to get as much out of this as possible. We'll continue to seek additional grant funding, additional sources of funds for the project, so we can keep adding to the significant amount of money that we have already compiled for this project.
Did it include that 4th Street T piece as well?
Yes.
Yeah, it did?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And that's a huge chunk of the $5 million.
Right, and that's why I'm thinking if that's a $2 to $3 million piece right there, $3 million piece right there, would the additional $2 million take care of the retaining wall. It sounds like we could take thermoplastic paint and paint nice stripes down. We know what the cost is on that. Just trying to be a little bit humorous, but
This will have
It's an inside,
thermoplastic.
it's an inside joke.
but with the hour, that's not what's being asked for here. What we're hearing is a separated, divided, bordered, protected, multi-use path, essentially. And it doesn't sound to me that the additional 2 million that's in that 5 million would be enough to do retaining wall and all of that for the section. That's why I'm wondering if that 5 million is truly a number, because I don't want to get stuck on the 5 million like we have in the past and saying, oh, well, you talked about 5 million and now a year from now it's 10.
And I appreciate the comment.
Yeah.
Again, it's a conceptual estimate.
Thanks for asking on that. What I'm wrestling with a little bit is a progress report on this thing. It'll take a while, and to come back, I'm gonna pick an arbitrary time period. It probably isn't most desirable, but let's say a year to let us know where we're at, where we're going, what the plan is, how we're doing on the funding, et cetera, et cetera. Because it seems like, well, you've been working on it for a year and a half. You have, certainly. We have not. And it seems a little abrupt at this point with all the balls that are up in the air on it.
We will have a conceptual design probably a year from now, and I think that would be an opportune time to bring that back. It'll have an estimate associated with it.
Yeah.
It'll have thought through some of these things. We'll continue to seek additional funding, so I think that is a good time frame for us.
Yeah, that sounds fine. Is there a motion? I lost track.
I think the motion was to accept the report.
And is there a second?
Second.
Moved and second. Roll call, please.
Aye.
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 Aye, matter carries 4-0. Thanks once again for all your help, folks. And with that, council members' reports. Any council members' reports? No, I already said my piece. So therefore, we are adjourned. Ooh.